Good morning and welcome to the North of Tyne Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on Tuesday the 8th of December 2020 at 10 a.m. on a virtual basis under COVID regulations due to the pandemic. So we'll start with item number 1 on the agenda, which is welcome and introductions. So with us this morning, my name's Councillor Gregor Ruffhead. I'm a Northumberland County Councillor for Berwick and I'm chair of this committee. And we've got Councillor Linda Wright, who's the vice chair, Councillor Liz Dunn, who's a Northumberland County Councillor, who's a substitute member. We've got Councillor Stephen Fairley from Newcastle City Council, Councillor Greg Stone from Newcastle City Council, Councillor Gordon Stewart from Northumberland County Council, Councillor Sandra Graham from North Tyneside Council. Those are the members, and in terms of cabinet members this morning, we've got Councillor Bruce Pickard, who's the Deputy Mayor of North Tyneside and also the Combined Authorities Cabinet Member for Economic Growth, Dr. Henry Kippen, who's our Director of Economic Growth, Peter Bryant, who's from Shared Future, who'll be discussing the Citizens Assembly agenda item, Tom Sharman, who's our Engagement Officer, who'll also be presenting on that item, Rob Hamilton, who's the Combined Authorities Chief Economist, Janice Gillespie, who's the Section 73 Officer, which is the Chief Finance Officer, and Elizabeth Kerr, who's our Governance and Scrutiny Manager, and Lynn Camsell, who's our Democratic Services Officer. And apologies this morning, agenda item number 2, I've got Councillor Susan Dungworth from Northumberland County Council, and as explained, Councillor Liz Dunn's here as a substitute member in her absence, and also we've got apologies from Councillor Anita Lower from Newcastle City Council, and Councillor Greg Stone's here in her place. And we've also just received apologies from Councillor Peter Early from North Tyneside. So that takes us on to item 3. Any declarations of interest? I can't see any hands up. No. So that takes us on to agenda item number 4. And are we happy to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of October 2020 as a true record?
Agreed.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Sandra Graham proposed. Any seconder? I'll second those. All those in favour? Just show hands. Yeah, I see a majority there. So that takes us on to the main business this morning. Item 5, Cabinet Member Portfolio Updates. So first up this morning, we've got Councillor Bruce Pickard, the Deputy Mayor North Tyneside, who's the Cabinet Member for Economic Growth. And you've had the report attached as background information. And I'll hand over to Bruce to present this item.
Okay, I assumed, Henry, have you got a couple of slides, did you say?
Not for this item, Councillor,
okay.
But for the recovery item later.
Okay, fine. Obviously, you've got the report already. I think the main point to realise is that out of the 100 million investment programme, we've invested about 40 million in 48 projects. But obviously, that's just part of the picture because there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes as well. So what we do have is various projects that are ongoing at the moment, various issues in the pipeline, and obviously some programs that we've announced already and that we're still going through the proposal of bringing things together. So as I mentioned before, we have an investment plan of 100 million. And perhaps some of the highlights at the minute are, if you look at the inward investment side, we were successful in 2 inward investments, although one of them since has had problems because of the COVID. But the Very Sure investment still went ahead. They've done the physical works to the building and are recruiting, although at a lower rate, but that's inevitable because of what we've actually got on. We've also got the Rural Growth Fund and the North of Tyne Growth Fund. Now, both of those are bedding in well, where we have a panel of experts who then apply the procedure that we want to the companies that are applying for the particular grants. And we've had a number of successes there, and there's already one mentioned in the point there. One of the most recent funds that we're doing at the minute is the COVID-19 response funding. Now, this is really what this one is about, is recovery and innovation. There was a £5 million response fund, which we're using through the 3 councils to support small-scale charities and businesses where perhaps there's been a miss in the government national support. And what we're looking to do there is how we help our businesses recover to the new ways of working. it's obviously, I don't think we're going to ever go back to the old days of shopping and retail. So we need to prepare our businesses with innovative help of how they can move onto the digital platforms. But we're also looking at how we can use that for innovation for other areas. So we're looking at new businesses that we might be able to encourage to come into the area. Obviously, we then need to look at the combined issue of training that's required. What we need to do is how do we move people who have been recently made redundant quickly into new jobs? And those are the issues that we're looking at now. We have enough programs in place for ourselves and the council to look at people who have perhaps got barriers to the employment. But this is about people who have just recently been made redundant. How can we quickly turn them around to give them support, give them help, and move them back into employment? On some of the other issues that we're dealing with, which perhaps aren't in the report, but are very important for as far as the North East are concerned, is that we've also set out our Green Deal, which is a £9 million programme. And at the moment, we're looking for partners that will help us in moving that forward. A report on that is due to come to a committee soon, so all I'll do is mention that it's there. We also have our Culture and Creative Recovery Fund, which has been quite successful. And once again, we're working through people like England North East and through various organisations where we can actually help those involved in the culture of the North East, because it's a very important area and really a bit of a gap in funding between the very big areas and the very small areas that we can actually help out in those. We obviously got the money from the government for the brownfield housing. And at the minute, there's quite a rush on to identify sites. Each council has done that, but we need to go through all the business cases to make sure they match up with the government requirements on the Green Book. There's a very short turnaround timescale on that, but we're quite confident that we'll be able to start delivering projects on that very early next year in all three local authorities. We also were successful in getting the European Social Fund money for the Employment and Skills Programme. That's vital if we're going to meet the new requirements of the new business models that moving forward. As I mentioned before, the £9 million Green New Deal Fund. But we're also launching a £5 million Digital Ecosystem Fund. This is about bringing to the market issues for dealing with digital provision, digital companies, digital startups. Now, when we brought this forward, originally it was just going to be on the basis of our own Combined Authority doing it. But the idea was actually taken up by the LEP, and it's been now expanded. So it's going to be all of the areas in the northern region. All 7 councils have now signed up to this. So what will happen is half the money will come from the LEP, and the other half will be split 25-25 between all 7 authorities. So here's another successful way where we've been able to leverage in additional support in the Northeast through our own funds, while at the same time preserving the fact that we don't want to duplicate funding. We want to use ours for the north of the Tyne to do that. So all these projects are designed to help our business, stimulate the economy. And in the time that we're in at the minute, one of the things we've got, which we didn't have in the past, is the speed that we can actually respond to issues. So the £10 million programme, it has the ability to be used by the Mayor in consultation with the Chief Executive and the investment panel. So it can very quickly change the emphasis as and when it's needed, because there's government announcements every day, and what we don't want to do is be duplicating. What we can't do is we don't have the resources to replace government, but what we do have is the resources to make us in a very good position to respond and to recover. So that was a brief run through of what we're doing on the investment panel at the moment. So perhaps I'll leave it back up to your committee and yourselves, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. And are you happy to take questions from members now?
Yep. Certainly, yes.
So does any members have any questions for Councillor Pickard this morning? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor Pickard, and thank you very much for your report. I was interested in your comments about retraining the population who have lost their jobs recently through COVID. And my interest is, are we going to make use of community facilities so that our residents don't have to then travel in to the normal traditional hubs and incur costs? Because obviously money's of a premium, and I know how many families we are delivering parcels to in my neck of the wood, and there's an awful lot, and there's an awful lot of those young families who unfortunately have been hit by losing their jobs. So just have you had any thoughts around that?
It's a very valid point, and there's two issues. First of all, we have the adult education budget, which isn't part of the investment program, but we're looking at how we can realign that. Although a lot of the courses have already been bidded for, and we've given it there. But if you remember when the authority was first set up, the Mayor Jamie recommended that we need to be more local in how we actually deliver. So what we need to do now, we've got the fund agreed, is have a look at, well, what are the needs first, and then see whether we can arrange that local type. Now, to do that, we really need to work very, very closely with the 3 local authorities, because they know their areas best. And at the minute, for instance, on some of the funds, we're working with the DWP as well, which is a real change, because they were often seen as policing unemployment as opposed to being in the forefront of tackling unemployment through proactive action. So we're busy working on programs with that. But yes, it is one of the mayor's priorities to try and ensure that we localise delivery of training as far as practical. It can't always be that way, depending on the type of capital equipment required. But where it's a theoretical provision, it should be a lot easier to do that. And I'll feed this back to the mayor following this conversation.
Could I just say one more thing? Sorry, Chair, I forgot to mention it. I mean, one of the things as well is obviously the digital offer we have. And I was just wondering if you could also bear in mind our libraries, who are struggling a bit at the moment with the traditional book learning, and maybe the digital offer could be put into our libraries.
Yes, I do know that each local authority, this is even before the setup of the combined authority, had to draw up a plan that included the digital use of libraries. Although we haven't considered that, it might be something worthwhile passing from yourselves back for us to maybe ask as a catalyst to approach them and see how they actually done that. If I remember rightly, years and years ago was the People's Network, where we actually set that up. And with not just shopping and things, but more and more contact with government, contact with local government, requiring the use of IT, it may be worthwhile that we ask the authorities to readdress that People's Network issue of how they use IT in the libraries.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruce. Brilliant.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much, Councillor Pickard, for your presentation and adding to that. It's gratifying to see that 40% of the 100 million is now committed. And as I understand it, the levelling up agenda is going to include funding coming through combined authorities. And do we have schemes ready on the shelf to respond to that opportunity for the benefit of our residents in the 3 local authority areas?
Yeah, behind the issues that are publicised, we have a very good team with Henry and Chrissy and Rob who continue to look at, well, what are the requirements of the funding applications coming up? So, for instance, we know that fund comes in around January or February, I believe, early next year, the announcements are made. So we do look how, but it's not just that, it's how do we get more bang for your buck? So how do we work with the LEP? How do we then work with the other authorities in the region? Because although they don't have the combined authority, the leaders still work very closely together through the LEP. And yes, so we do look at projects like that. And we also try to realise that it's not just us who can deliver this. We really need a strong input from private industry here. They're the ones who are creating the jobs, and also from the voluntary sector as well, who are there creating jobs and creating enterprises as well. So yes, we have a programme in mind that every time we know there's funding coming up, we look at how we can meet that through our aims and values at the very start. If you look on our website, you'll see these are our programmes. Also has to fit in with the LEP's economic strategy. So yes, we do look at it that way. So hopefully we'll get a very good announcement next year on what we actually get from that fund, levelling up fund.
Well done on your agility and flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Can't see anybody.
Well,
I've just
two I can see.
Councillor Stone.
Oh, Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Bruce. From the report, I was wanting to ask a bit more about inward investment. In terms of, obviously, understand there's commercial sensitivities involved, and you can't say too much about stuff in the pipeline. I was wondering if you could give any feedback on how you think things are working in terms of the promotion of the North of Tyne region, and what coordination in terms of the marketing, and what kind of level of response we're getting at the minute from businesses in terms of obviously we're in a competitive marketplace on this one for inward investments. And wondering if you could give us a bit more of your thoughts on that.
The inward investment side is working very well. As I say, we had 2, which has gone down to 1, but the other one is still considering. It's just looking at what will happen post-COVID, so it needs to bring the funding. I can mention that one because that's in the public, but there are at least another 2 in the pipeline, both technology related, that we're discussing with, and there's a possibility of another very large one as well. Now, obviously, we can't discuss what they are, but one of the issues that we have is in the past, we've been able to discuss with them, and then they've gone somewhere else because of the inward investment facilities that could provide them. Now we're in the negotiations with all these firms, whether they want to go to Sheffield, whether they want to go to London, whether they want to go to Scotland, whether they even want to go to Ireland, things like this. So we're now in there. And I think one of the things we're realizing is that one of them recently was quite a large one, and perhaps our initial £1 million might not be large enough. And that's why we need to work with the LEP as well to see what type of support we can provide, still within a very reasonable price per job when we actually look at it. So although it's had a bit of a dip because of the COVID, not from companies who look to 9 months, 1 year in advance of when they're coming forward. So we have some very active leads at the moment, which officers are dealing with.
Thanks for that.
Any more questions? I've just got one for Bruce. You mentioned...
Chair, sorry, Councillor Fairley had his hand up.
Councillor Fairley, sorry, I couldn't see your camera.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just having to wave my hand here. Yeah, I'm looking at this, and it mentions in the report, says you're taking cross-sector innovation. Now, I take that to interpret that as meaning that you're looking to support a whole load of different sort of business sectors, like software, tourism, retail, engineering, I don't know. Or is it more that you're referring to, and you say cross-sector, do you mean public sector, private sector, third sector, or is it everything? And what sort of breakdown as to where the money's going between these sectors? Because it seems that the digital sector is very much the in fashion area at the moment, but not necessarily everybody wants to work in the digital sector, as capable of working in the digital sector. Are we getting much investment coming through in more like traditional manufacturing, for instance? As that, there could be opportunities for a resurgence of manufacturing because it have more local supply chains. We've discovered this through, say, PPE contracts, where the sort of global supply chain hasn't really delivered for us, and there are people looking to bring things more in-house and manufacture more locally of things. Is that an area, or has that not come through yet?
Yeah, it is. By cross-sector, in a sense, we mean public sector, private sector, and voluntary. So it's across the three. Obviously, the scales are quite significantly different between the three areas. But then if we look to the category of industry we're hoping to support, we can't support everything. So really, we're looking at how we help those to innovate, but at the same time, how can we help support and stabilize existing, as you said, industry that is actually there. So the innovation could be anything from working with Procter & Gamble to working with an offshore, to working with a company that, like you said there, that changes from one form of manufacture into supporting PPE. So we're looking at a number of areas that we do that. That's why when we try to do these programs, we're trying to establish if you like, a panel of expertise that can actually help us administer those particular funds, because the organisation itself, North of Tyne, is a very lean organisation, and we're allocating funds for maybe 2 or 3 years to help things up. So we need to make the best of the expertise we have in the region. So, for instance, the Culture Fund will have experts on that. The Digital Fund has experts with universities and things on that. The offshore has the same thing. So we try to use that model of using our money and using us on the board to be in line with what we need to deliver. So some of the issues that we need to address moving forward are that for every company we bring in that might bring 500 to 1,000 jobs, we now need to look at, well, how do we support those people who've perhaps lost their job or want to start up in business themselves? Because we'll get just as much employment through individuals becoming self-employed, or how do we help a small plumbing firm take on their first apprentice or recruit 2 or 3 extra staff? Because those will have a significant impact on the area. So yes, the cross-sector means across all of those areas, but the cross-industry bit that we're looking at is we're trying not to spread it too thin, but we are looking more towards supporting existing and helping innovation. Don't know if that helps at all.
Oh, that's good. That gives some bit more clarity. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Any more questions? Just shout out, because I'm having a bit of problem with seeing people's cameras. I can only see some people's cameras. Anybody know? So a question that I had, Bruce, you talked about the Culture and Creativity Fund. Obviously, culture and the arts is an industry that's taken a massive hit this year because of COVID. And it's not necessarily the big organizations that are necessarily the worst hit. It's the smaller ones as well. Is the possibility that will be used to support our smaller arts and culture groups across the North of Tyne area as well, not just the big names that we all think of?
I think you're right that we need to have a very good cross section how we support them. I'll be the first to admit I'm not exactly the expert on the arts and culture, but what we do have is we have a panel that involves all 3 local authorities. So their arts and culture departments are feeding into this. Now, I don't think it's our funds there to help the very large organisations. So there's a variety of use for the culture fund that we're actually going to do. And actually, it's probably better if we, following from this meeting, send you the remit that we've just agreed with the consortium that's actually going to run the fund for us. But we very much recognise that the arts and culture are an inherent part of any regeneration. And we had a £3 million budget there for issues like festivals and events around the 3 areas. Obviously, that's been put on hold a bit because of the coronavirus, but hopefully next year we can use our culture fund and the events fund to really start a bit of a resurgence to say, look, we've had the COVID, we're out of it now, let's celebrate being the North East and let's celebrate moving forward. So, Shira, I think it's been interesting to give you the full rundown of what our brief is on that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Chair, this is Henry. If it's helpful, I'd be happy to come back to a meeting when's appropriate with a breakdown of how we're approaching this. Councillor Pickard's quite right. The focus has been really deliberately on innovation and recovery and making sure we're not duplicating on government grants to the bigger organisations. So we're well aware of that issue. I'd be happy to bring forward a bit of detail on what we're doing across the tourism and place and cultural elements of our work, if that's helpful.
Thanks for that, Henry. And thank you for your answer there, Bruce. Just before I let you go, is there any final questions or comments for Bruce? Just shout out, because, as I said, I can't see the cameras. No. So thank you very much, Councillor Pickard, for your attendance this morning. It was a very useful and informative update in terms of what's been happening in your portfolio area over the past months since we've last met with you. And if we don't hear back from you again, I hope you have a good time over Christmas holiday, and obviously we'll be in touch sometime next year again. And take care, and thank you for your attendance.
Thanks very much to yourself and to the committee. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that leads us on to agenda item 5B, which we will be taking at the end of the meeting, because Councillor Nick Forbes, who's the leader in Newcastle City Council and the Cabinet Member for Business Competitiveness on the Combined Authority, is unable to attend this due to another meeting. So we'll take him at the end, which moves us on to, for the time being, agenda item number 6, which is COVID-19 and the Combined Authority's response and recovery plans. And this morning we've got Dr. Henry Kippen, who's our Director of Economic Growth, presenting the report.
Thank you, Chair. So sadly for the committee, you have to listen to another update from me. But thankfully, I do have some nice slides, which I think Paul is going to bring up on the screen now. If it's okay, Paul. So while these are loading, I'll just do a minute on what I'm intending to walk through. You'll see that there was a paper included with your pack, which looks which continues a similar format to those that we've circulated over the last couple of meetings. Gives a bit of background to where we're at in terms of the COVID response journey, and of course you'll be living this in real time within your local authorities too. A little around the arrangements that the region has more broadly in place, and then really going through elements of the role of the combined authority, some of which I went through last time, and then focusing on the spending review as the most recent set of announcements, which give us, as was discussed earlier in the meeting, a new set of challenges to address. Can I check whether anyone can see a presentation on the screen? I can't actually see this on my screen, so here we go. That's me with the problem.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, sorry, if you just bear with me 1 second. I'm shifting an iPad around, so hopefully, so everyone can see that. I can now see that. That's great. So what I'll do over the next 3-4 minutes is just go through a set of slides which do 4 things. Firstly, give a sense of where we are, context, an update, focusing particularly on what that means for the North Tyne Combined Authority. Some reflections on the spending review, which has been an important milestone for us for various reasons, and we'll go into what now and what next. And then just responding to questions from the committee last time round. There's a bit of detail on the North Tyne COVID Capacity Fund, which I've pulled into the presentation. I know members wanted to see a bit of detail on how that fund had been defrayed and where the money had gone and what the ongoing work looks like. And then I wanted to come back on a point that Councillor Pickard had made about our support for COVID innovation and recovery. So there's a couple of slides at the end there about our Recovery Innovation Fund, which has just been approved by Cabinet. So Paul, if you go on to the next slide, please. In terms of where we are, remarkably, every time I do a presentation about the context, the presentation slide looks slightly different and needs to be amended, which I think tells its own story, doesn't it, of how fast things are moving and how quickly we're having to adapt as local authorities and regional authorities. We are, at the time of writing, obviously out of a national lockdown and into a tier system. There is a degree of uncertainty about how that pans out over the next few weeks. And of course, we've got a kind of Christmas period in the middle where some of our restrictions will be unlocked. But we have a strong collaboration going on both across the North Tyne Combined Authority, as you would expect, at a political and an officer level, but also across the region more widely. That is based on the reality, really, that certainly in terms of the way in which government is seeing regional response, the LA7 is the appropriate geography for that in their eyes, but also reflecting, I think, from the point of view of leaders and mayors, a need to really make sure that collaboration is as strong as possible, because clearly recovery doesn't stop at the river, whichever side you're looking at it from. So there are an ongoing set of actions there, which will continue, including the regime around vaccination and testing, and that's really not for discussion here necessarily, but obviously a big part of the picture and a big part of where resources are going into at the moment. Spending review, we'll come to this in a second. I think what the spending review does is give a bit of clarity for the next year, but not that much more than that. So what we were expecting to be quite a comprehensive settlement, I think if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said we'll have a spending review and a white paper, which looks quite different to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. So that I think has implications, particularly for the levelling up that was mentioned earlier. We are approaching the Brexit endgame, I think you call it an endgame, although we'll see. It still looks quite fragile at the time of writing. There's a nice picture of Frost and Barnier there, who hold the future in their hands, but obviously the implications of that will be profound one way or another for the region. Certainly the government's own reports indicated that the Northeast would see major implications relative to other regions too. Rob's going to go into some of that later. On the ground, response and recovery very much underway and ongoing. Our local authorities, in my personal view, are doing a fantastic job with the amazing mix, really, of things that need to be done, ranging from the real terms economic impacts and impacts on people in their places, right the way through to the ongoing work that directors of public health are doing to try and shape a data-led response. And there's a huge amount of work there. We, as a combined authority, have been very clear that in many areas we're not leading but supporting and unlocking flexible funding. As stating, we've spoken about this before, but There is a lot of work going on, really good collaborative work across the piece to make sure that we are doing everything we can to maximise both the impact of national schemes, Kickstart, Youth Hubs, some of the work on apprenticeships and adult skills are examples drawn out here, and the relationship with DWP, which we think is very positive. We're going to have to squeeze that as much as possible and make sure we do absolutely everything we can, because the unemployment effect from this crisis is going to be really significant. We know that. Next slide, please. So what I'll do now is just reflect a little bit on the spending review, and some of this is running through the numbers at a high level, although the scale of what we're talking about here is pretty huge in terms of the economic impact. The main questions really are what next and what does that mean for us, which I'll come to. By way of a quick snapshot, I don't know if anybody watched the spending review playing out. It's hardly high octane television, but was a bit of a game of two halves, in that the Chancellor set out what he called an economic emergency in the first half, and then the second half was a range of spending commitments. So in terms of that macro picture, a smaller economy that we're heading to by the end of this year, the Office of Budget Responsibility estimate over 10% shrinkage, a budget deficit which is ongoing at just shy of 20%, and an unemployment effect that OBR predicts will be up to 7.5% by next summer, which is a lot of people potentially out of work, which is obviously incredibly worrying and something that we're going to have to roll in together to address. All in all, taken as a piece, there's been lots of press around this, but the talk was of the worst economic situation for 300 years, which then I think frames what comes next, both in terms of the spending commitments, but also the restraint in some of the areas that the Chancellor was very careful to set out. In terms of departmental spending and public services, you'll all have a version of this, of course, and the local authority settlement is to follow, as is settlements for other public services. But in broad terms, a mixed picture. Around 280 billion this year has been spent on COVID-related impacts, dished out in various ways. Government has allocated around 55 billion for next year, which tells an interesting story of what they think will happen in a way. You know, there's a lot of assumptions about the impact of a vaccine in there, and potentially not having to spend as much next year on economic impacts as this year. So clearly that's quite uncertain, and I guess we hope it's true to some extent. Mixed picture on public sector pay, and of course the usual winners and losers. So a substantial multi-year defence settlement juxtaposed with a downgrading in the 0.7% commitment around international aid gives you a sense of where the winners and losers were from the review this time around. In terms of skills and jobs, we've talked a little about this, but some substantial money in the system. I think there's a lot of work for us to do, which we'll come to, on making sure that that's got enough local influence, and that an increase in DWP capacity and national skills and job schemes translate into things that we can actually build on, adapt, shape locally, and build on our adult education budget devolution. I think it's really important that we do that. And then we come to the sort of headlines around Levelling Up Fund, a National Infrastructure Bank for the North, some digital and climate related announcements, some of which were re-announcements, some of which we're still unpicking the detail on. Essentially a mix of measures that will stimulate the economy here, things that a Chancellor at a point in the political cycle needs to do, but plenty in there to pick at in terms of what the implications are for us and how we take best advantage. And then part of that was a restatement of a long-term commitment around regional settlements for transport. Next slide, please. What does it mean? I think I've picked out 5 things here, and I know that members will have their own reflections. All of these things are important to us as a combined authority. Short term and long term, this is a 1-year view. We're going to need to see in the new year, I suspect towards the summertime, a multi-year settlement and a policy framework to follow. So this is very much, I think, a holding pattern, and certainly the view from Treasury informally is that we should see this as such. You know, as a committee, we've put really bold recovery plans on the table, as have every other mayoral combined authority, and we certainly haven't seen those funded in full this time around. So we're expecting that next year there'll be another turn of the wheel. Central and local, there is an inbuilt tension here, in that quite a lot of what was in the spending review is not necessarily about devolution, but it is about how you adapt and work with national measures. And you can see some of that classic tension playing out in a different way now. The emphasis for us is clearly that we've got very credible delivery mechanisms, as Councillor Pickard has said, an assurance framework and a set of programmes that are already running around housing, around skills, around some of our key growth areas. So I think we've got plenty to build on. Inevitably, we're in a mix of economics and politics here. There'll be this wasn't a budget, so it's kind of tax and spending wasn't treated as such. But you can read into a lot of the analysis of the spending review that there's going to be some tricky choices to follow for a chancellor over the next few years, and when they happen and how that plays out is going to be inevitably about political choices as well as what's economically appropriate. And then I think it's worth saying finally on this slide that lots of this is about what wasn't said as much as what was. So there was relatively little said about Brexit within the statement and the strategy that followed it. Limited amount of detail on the regime of post-European Union structural funding, so shared prosperity fund in the lingo, some rollover if you like, but that longer term clarity that the region's going to need, given the scale of the funding that it's had in the past, is something we're really going to have to push hard on. Next slide, please. So that was my run through of the spending review, Chair. I'm very happy to go into now a bit of detail as requested on the capacity fund and the innovation side. Alternatively, I can stop here for any questions or reflections if that gives people a breather.
I think it's probably best to take questions relevant to what you've just discussed, then go on to the capacity fund.
Okay.
So does members have any questions for Henry? Any questions? No? Okay. So Henry, you can proceed.
I should without wanting to feel too confident about what I've just told you, I should mention that other analysis is available, and you might want to go on the BBC website to get a fuller picture than I've just given you. But there you go. I'll try my best. So Chair, what I'm going to do over the next few slides is firstly focus on the North of Tyne COVID Capacity Fund, and this specifically is the 5 million that we unlocked earlier in the year. That we talked about at last ONS and that Councillor Pickard mentioned for immediate impacts, and then I'll talk about the longer term piece which Cabinet have just considered in November. So just to run through the basics on our capacity fund, agreed by Cabinet in March of this year with the explicit objective of supporting COVID response effectively, and those things that we knew were impacting on business, voluntary sector, communities, residents across our 3 local authorities in the middle of what was the first lockdown period, really. So Cabinet unlocked 5 million from the investment fund in order to do that. The principle that was done on, and that's written into the Cabinet papers which are available and I can forward as well if needed, was a principle that we should do this in a way that's bottom up. So we as a combined authority, I think, would not presume to know what the community impact looks like in areas of North Tyneside, for example. What we can do is create a bottom-up process where our local authorities are coming to us and saying, here's where we see the scale of need, here's where the gaps are in government provision, and that's exactly how we approached this fund. So we created a quick mechanism in order to do that. We absolutely aligned that to government support. So I think through the process, we've tried really hard, and this is obviously, can be a tricky process at times because you're adapting in real time, but trying to make sure that our marginal money in the North of Tyne, which of course is small in comparison to the national settlements that have been coming down the pipes. We're just making sure that really is adding value always, and that's really has to be done through collaboration. We can't guess that needs to be done in partnership with our local authorities. So what that then translated into was 3 programs of activity which have a balance across business, communities and the voluntary sector, and then an additional 500k which I'll come to, which supported a digital inclusion program, which was a really important part of the way that we responded given the scale of the digital exclusion challenge. So at a glance, and again this shows you a bit how the 3 local authorities approached this. They each pulled together packages of investment or suggested investment which crossed business, people, communities. You'll see that there's lots of commonality there. There's a lot of work done to make sure that the offers to businesses, for example, weren't wildly different either side of Wall's End. So there's quite a lot of good work done by economic directors and their teams to make sure that was the case. You'll see there is some particular emphasis put on particular things depending on what the local context is like. So Northumberland's bid, for example, has a degree of mental health and wellbeing support in there, additional support for refugees and ESOL learners. You'll see that in North Tyneside, there's a particular regime of voluntary sector grants that was developed, and I should say our voluntary sector ambassador was involved in all of this as it went through. And then in Newcastle, you see there was a emphasis on not only the city centre but on local high streets, given the size of the authority and the fact that we're talking about cities and high streets and towns, if you like, as well as just the city centre. If you move on to the next slide, Paul, please. So progress to date. This is a moving feast, I would say. So what you've got on this slide is the numbers as they exist at the moment. 263 enterprises receiving support. That could be in business support, kind of non-cash and some cash. 416 jobs safeguarded, which is not insignificant. 461 residents supported into volunteering. 18 spaces created or safeguarded for community and business activities, and 349 participants supported with employment and skills. So that reflects a picture which is, if you just go back one, Paul, sorry. You're going too fast for us, this slide flicking. I'm not Chris Whitty, you know, I need to take my time over these things. I should say that not all of the investment has been defrayed, if you like. So this is an interim picture. We're expecting those numbers to go up. We've got around, I think Chrissy can put me right if I'm wrong, but it's certainly south of the 1.5 million mark in terms of what's been physically defrayed yet. So there's obviously those numbers will go up, and but with these are kind of real impacts. These are real things happening. So I think we're really happy that we're seeing that tangible progress. And if you then go to the next slide, just a couple of snapshots about. I mean, these are quotes from people who've been able to benefit from a combination of local authority and combined authority agility, I would say. You know, we're not trying to suggest we've saved the world for everybody, far from it, but I think it is worth reflecting on the fact that we have, with this funding, made a difference for some people in a way that's positive, and certainly that reflects well in comparison to other combined authorities. This quote is from Debbie from DW Styling in Blythe. I quite fancy visiting myself. Well, my wife would suggest that I might need to in the run up to Christmas anyway. But this is an example of the kind of business support which has bridged the gap for people, and certainly that kind of virtual support as well as money in the system has been really important for people. If you go to the next slide, please, Paul. And then this example is from Benwell. This is more in the voluntary sector space, you would say, but of course this is all connected, and really some evidence here about the importance of a grant to make sure that services could continue through this time, that staff roles could be supported, that organisations like this, and there's certainly more than footsteps here that have gone through this process, that have had to think about the mix of online and offline services that they need to do now. And I think that will increasingly be, you know, that issue is not going to go away, is it? That mix of what we do online and offline over the next 6 months or so. Next up, please. Next slide, sorry. And then this is an example of a North Tyneside programme, which is a kind of back to work service, really. And as Councillor Pickard said, there will be a huge focus on initiatives which support people that are furthest from the labour market and that have more complex needs, and where a degree of joint DWP and local support will be needed. But there are also a lot of people who could quickly get back into work, who we could help, who might not need as much intensive resource and support, but there needs to be an offer for in the region as well. And we're very mindful that a lot of organisations, initiatives that provide those services already will exist in the system, and that we're working with and not reinventing the wheel over the next 6 months to a year. Next slide, please. So that gives a sense of the progress to date on the COVID Response Fund. Again, I might pause there for a second, Chair, if members have questions. I would say that if they're really difficult questions, I'm going to bring in Chrissy, who's got the numbers at her fingertips.
Any questions for Henry? Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, thank you, Henry. Very thought-provoking. We realise there's some urgency in getting this money out there, and we're dealing across North Tyne area, which and the makeup of the VCS in particular will be completely different there. How can we be assured through scrutiny that we've got it right, or have you learned any big lessons from this? And how to go back to these organisations to say, right, you've saved 416 jobs have been safeguarded. How can I actually justify? Well, sorry, how can we actually say that has happened?
So I can bring Chrissy in if on some further detail, but I think, Councillor, they are really important questions. In terms of the first that you raised, how do we understand what the real impact is and how do we learn from that? We have a commitment as an investment panel to make sure that we are bringing back an interim report and convene exactly that discussion. So that'll be a combination of directly what we hear from those individuals and businesses that have received funding and what our local authorities are interpreting about the impact as well. So we're planning to do that as an investment panel. I mean, Chris, you can correct me what the right point in the cycle is, but that certainly needs to happen because we do have a commitment in the investment paper that we brought through to make sure that we are being agile, understanding the impact, and learn as we go. So we definitely will go through that process as an investment panel. In terms of the assurance in the process, or the second element of your question, which is how do we know that money's actually gone to the right places? Chrissy, are you still on the line? Do you want to say a little bit of a word about how we're making sure that there's a kind of tight line through all of this?
Yes, no, certainly. And I think, I can also sort of add a little bit to what Henry said before too. I think we've been constantly learning and sharing best practice as well through the delivery of this fund. Officers from the 3 authorities have worked really closely together to share learning and best practice. And the fund itself has been designed with flexibility at its heart as well, to make sure that they've been able to kind of respond to an ever sort of changing and evolving kind of government support situation as well. In terms of kind of capturing the outcomes and the inputs of this, in terms of our day-to-day monitoring, this data that we're sort of sharing with you today has come from our Q2 monitoring returns. So we do ask all of the local authorities to provide us with evidence of any outputs that they provide. So this gives us the assurance that what people are saying is happening is actually happening on the ground, and it is backed up with real examples as well. And what we are doing is we're capturing this, all the outcomes and the outputs and the good work that's happening, and we're feeding this into our recovery planning as well. And we're learning from it, and we're starting to take the best of what we're seeing through this fund and making sure that that's fed into our recovery work, and also that we'll be capturing it as part of our evaluation as well.
Yeah, if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
Henry, has there been any abuse of the system found at all?
Certainly not that I'm aware of.
That's a good question, a very good answer. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions for Henry at this point? No. And just to touch on something Councillor Stewart said, in terms of the investment panel for the combined authority, that does have representation from the cabinet of the combined authority and at least one member from each of the constituent authorities. So they should be well aware of what's going on in terms of the investment panel.
Chair, that's right. The investment panel has the deputy leader from each local authority as a member, the chief executives from each local authority, and of course our CFO, monitoring officer, representative from the LEP. It's a right old cast list, but definitely we make sure that it's a collaboration. That's what it's supposed to be. That's how it has to function. So you're absolutely right, Chair.
Any more questions for Henry at this point? So Henry, do you want to proceed with the next part of the presentation?
Certainly. So is the slide still up for everybody? It says North of Tyne Recovery Innovation Deal on the front. Yeah. Okay. So I won't dwell too much on this side of things because this is quite new, and the caveat to this is we're working through as an investment panel actually, and as a team and as a collaboration, as we said, the delivery implications of this. But what I wanted to walk ONS through was a cabinet decision that was made at November cabinet to bring forward a fund which we're calling the North of Tyne Recovery Innovation Deal. These things can get a little confusing. Pretty much everything's called recovery something at the moment, isn't it? But the focus, as Councillor Pickard has said here, is in making sure that we are doing what we can to be as flexible as we possibly can with our investment fund at a time when we more than any region, I think, will need to make sure that we're supporting innovation in recovery. So these 5 bullet points address what that 10 million headline investment fund allocation is there to do, mindful that actually we want to make this a co-production and that we're still in the design process in terms of how that translates into delivery. So first is this need for flexible, adaptive support for recovery, ensuring that we maximise CA support in a difficult context. An obvious point which we've gone through, but that's what we're here for, as well as the long-term plays which we have aligned around particular sectors, as was highlighted before. Particular measures around small business, place-based change, adapting to where government is. We should be as flexible as possible, and that's what the cabinet have done actually. Adding value in innovation. So again, 10 million is a lot of money, but 10 million is a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of resource that government has had to put into the system for crisis support purposes, whether through the furlough system or whether bridging funding for businesses that have had to close, for example, in tier 3 areas at the moment. We think our value add, well, certainly Cabinet are convinced that our value add is in innovation and how we support recovery that leaves a legacy. So rather than adding to crisis support, which we don't feel we're best placed to address for obvious reasons, our value add is in how we make sure that we're recovering and are able to do and support and fund things now that might leave a legacy post-COVID and help us to transition to that future economy that we've all talked about. Particular emphasis there on jobs, how we keep and sustain and transition jobs. Point 3 here talks about co-design. Cabinet have been really clear that innovation means not sitting in a smoke-filled room deciding on what you're going to do and then doing it. There's a certain degree of co-design and co-production here that is really valuable and that we've now kicked off. So working with a range of partners across the region, business groups, voluntary sector, local authorities, those that are involved in kind of town and city centre planning as well. There's a range of conversations going on at the moment that are designed to generate really a set of quick wins and perspectives on what innovation might look like. And we're really mindful that this is going to be a short and medium and long play. So whilst we might have proposals coming through the door, which will then go through our assurance process, which represent quick wins, things that we might want to do now. There's also, this is also a long crisis, as we've said. There's going to be ebbs and flows. We shouldn't fall into the trap of earlier in the year of pretending we're in recovery and it's all going to be nice and linear. So I think this is about bringing forward flexible resource exactly in the manner that Councillor Pickard described earlier. If you just got the next slide, Paul. And this is the criteria that Cabinet have agreed, which run. I won't run through these, but they essentially restate some of what I've just described in slightly more specific language, with a prioritisation around jobs, around adaptation, pace, and innovation, and making sure that we are co-producing what that fund might look like. I'd really welcome suggestions and comments. We're going through a period of a few weeks up to Christmas with the intention to come into January's investment panel with, if you like, a package of proposals, ideas, and a sense from the team of how you might set out the design of a fund from here on in on the back of that co-productive process. So this is quite a new and innovative way of doing things. We're not pretending we've got the answers. We are being as flexible as possible in terms of our the use of our investment fund at a point in the cycle. And I know that Chrissy and Janice and others will have obviously got views on that and be closely involved in that process too. So I'll probably will leave it there, Chair. And again, happy to take questions and happy to come back to a further meeting once we've got, I mean, at a point in the cycle, a couple of months down the line, we'll be able to give chapter and verse on how Cabinet has seen the delivery of this stacking up. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that, Henry. Any questions for Henry at this point? No. Henry, are you happy to take any questions of like, as the whole entire presentation that you've just given the 3 parts and anything in the report? Just I'm thinking in case anybody has thought of questions since. Has anybody got any questions at all for Henry? No? Okay, well, Councillor Stone.
Hi, Chair, thank you. I've listened to the presentation. There's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of aspirational statements in there and not a lot of detail. Is that a fair comment?
On which
On your present, on the innovation presentation, the last few slides that you gave there seems to be a lot of things about flexibility, about all the kind of words I expect to read in the corporate business plan, but no actual real content.
Yeah. So fair question. The answer to your question is a straightforward yes, and that what Cabinet has been minded to do is to approve a headline fund, if you like, the creation of a headline fund, and then go through a process of
and then work on the details later.
Make sure we've got tangible projects coming through, and that's obviously going to happen over the next month or so. So you're quite right that it's long on concept and short on specifics at the moment.
Okay, that was the he's sounding a little bit cynical here, but in terms of the scrutiny role, I think it's a question that is worth asking. Is this a case of putting something forward and then let's populate it and let's fill the details in afterwards?
It is, and I think inevitably our funding is a mix of things that are directly commissioned, things that are the result of calls for proposals, EOIs, very, very kind of detailed, as Councillor Pickard said, pipeline development. This is slightly different in that we I think have got some ideas about what we'd like to see come through, but we want to make this a co-production. We want to pose the question. So that's by design.
Fair enough. I'll accept that as an answer. That's fine. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any more questions? No, I can't see anybody. Well, I've got one for Henry. In terms of the report that you've done, on the second page of it, under point 2 and sub point 7, we're talking about the Poverty Truth Commission. And I see that Cabinet have already agreed the principles of establishing a Poverty Truth Commission. And I think that's quite an innovative thing. And it's we're the first combined authority to do that. So we're taking a bit of a lead on that compared to other combined authorities. But the setup of the Poverty Truth Commission, I see that it mentioned somewhere in the proposals it was going to include local members from the 3 constituent authorities. In terms of that, I would hope that it would maybe be, the non-traditional, rather than like being your leaders or your opposition leaders or things like that, that it would maybe be an encouragement of being the backbench members who might have more time or capacity to be interested in such an important topic, and that the membership of that be spread geographically to give a fair proportion of the different geographical interests we've got of the combined authority, not that it's all focused in the rural area or all focused in the urban area. And what is the possibility, given that in Northumberland, but also in Newcastle as well as a handful, that we have the unique setup of having parish councils? Is there a possibility that the parish council sector could be represented on that? Because in Northumberland and parts of Newcastle that do have it, they tend to be the people on the ground who get the first point of contact about issues. And is this an actual real project, or is this what cynics would say a tick box exercise? Are we actually going to look at the real poverty issues and the hidden poverty, not just the main headline issues that stereotypically are tax poverty? Because more so than ever, in terms of COVID pressures, of financial pressures on everybody, there's probably a lot more hidden poverty in our communities than perhaps are in the official statistics. So I'll just leave that there for you.
That's a nice, easy question. Thank you, Chair. So I'd say in response to that, I think Ruth might be on the. I can't see from my screen, but if Ruth's here as well, obviously it'd be good to hear from Ruth because she's led the development of this proposal through the process. I would say 2 things in response to your question, which is a really good one. First is that the Poverty Truth Commission is one element of a range of things that we are doing to support an inclusive economy and make sure we're doing as much as we can around poverty reduction. So there is, for example, our Inclusive Economy Board, as you see in the piece there, the Inclusive Economy Investment Fund, which Cabinet approved the creation of, and we've got a set of inclusive growth principles embedded in most of our growth proposals. This initiative in particular is less about the kind of formal process of bringing elected members around the table and more about listening. It's a listening thing, really. It's about listening to people who have lived experience of poverty across the region and listening because almost for the sake of listening, because actually their views and their input and the kind of cleanness of that and how that influences what we do is often a missing piece of how combined authorities go about their business. So I think it addresses explicitly that gap, and there is work, given it was approved by Cabinet in November, as I recall. I think it was November. There's some work going on that's being led by Ruth on how that gets set up independently and making sure we've got the right people around the table that represent those diversity of views and across our diverse region, as you've said, Chair. I wonder though if Ruth is on the call, whether she might want to add to anything I've just said. Forgive me, Ruth, if are you there?
I am on the call. Thank you very much, Henry. Councillor Rufford, is it all right with you if I just add a couple of things?
Yeah, of course.
I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head that a lot of poverty is always, but particularly at the moment, unseen. And listening to people who are experiencing real poverty is a really, really hard thing to do. And we're not making light of it. We know it will be quite a challenge for us to be able to do this. So I suppose my first answer to your question is it's really all hands on board. Anyone who can help us do two things. One, get access to people who are not seen. People describe people in these circumstances as hard to reach. And I always think it's because you're not trying hard enough. And we do intend to try hard enough, and we would like people, particularly local members, to help us to do that and to facilitate ways that we can get access to people. And we'll be working very closely with the voluntary sectors across the three authorities to do that as well. I think the second thing is to help us to develop the capacity of people. We all know we're all sat round in our living rooms or our pretend offices right now, that actually it's quite hard to articulate what it is you want to say. And we're all used to it. We're all used to doing this. So for somebody who's not used to speaking and articulating their lives, their experiences and their aspirations for the future, that's a really hard thing to do. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment, and we're happy to bring something more back to you, Chair, is so how do you do the capacity building before you do the commission? Our experiences from everywhere from Leeds to Gateshead is if you invest in that bit of it, you get a really good outcome. This is not a fast thing. One of the things that our Cabinet discussed was that we're not going to be doing this in a couple of months. The pace of this is going to be deliberately quite slow in order to engage the right people and get their capacity up so that they're able to articulate what it is that they want to articulate. So any members of Overview and Scrutiny, if you've got ideas or thoughts or things that you think might help, more than welcome for you to help. We will need as much help as we can get. So really thank you for your question.
Thanks for that response, Ruth. And it sounds like, as always, that the door's open for members of the Scrutiny Committee within the Combined Authority. And perhaps if the committee were minded to, I think it would be useful to have an update on this, or this as an agenda item at a future meeting, just so we can have, it's something that could be more appropriate, at the tail end of a workshop session, just to moot around ideas from members. And I see the Vice Chair's got a hand up, so I'll let her come in.
Chair, sorry, it's just following on from something from Ruth just said about contacting these people who aren't really going through the normal channels, but are in poverty for one reason or another. And I mentioned earlier in the meeting about the volunteers from our community hall who are going out into the villages, and they're picking up people that aren't normally in the system. And I'm sure there's community centres all over the area who, like us, aren't making a song and dance about what we're doing, aren't on the local North East news, but are getting on every week and helping these families out. And perhaps we need to do a piece of work on how we can get in touch with all these various community centres or people who are helping, because I'm surprised at how many people our locals have picked up. And I'm actually doing a piece of casework around one family coming directly from that. So there must be some way we can find out where these groups are. Local members will know, so they can report that back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I think that will be excellent. One of the things I think we've all found inspiring during this pandemic is the sense of civic responsibility. You know, people have given of their time, their money, their wit and their wisdom over this pandemic, which has been really quite emotional, I think, for quite a lot of us to see that. You know, you guys are used to doing that. You're members of council. It's what you do all the time. But to see communities really rally around and support other people is fantastic. So yes, let's see if we can use them. Thank you.
Any more questions? No, I don't see anybody. I'll leave it at that point. But in principle, would the committee be happy with the Poverty Truth Commission coming back to a future either formal committee or informal workshop session? I'd see nodding. Yeah.
Yes.
Agreed,
Yes,
yeah.
please.
So I would just like to thank both Henry and Ruth. Oh, Sandra, did you want to speak? Sorry.
No, I was just saying yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So I'd just like to thank Henry for his presentation this morning on a good update, and thank Ruth for her contribution as well. And if members are happy, we'll progress with meeting on to the next agenda item. So that takes us on to item 7, the Citizens Assembly on Climate Change. And this is an update. And this morning we've got Peter Bryant from Shared Future and Tom Sharman, who's the Combined Authorities Engagement Officer, and both these will be presenting the report.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Chair, for that introduction. So I'm just going to quickly run through the paper, and then Pete Bryant, who is our expert that we've hired in to deliver this for us, is going to answer any questions you have about the logistics, the methods of Citizens Assembly. He's got lots of experience of running similar processes. So just kind of to go back to where you probably last thought about this, Cabinet agreed to have a Citizens Assembly in February. We anticipated this being a face-to-face event. A Citizens Assembly is quite different from a lot of other public engagement. The key thing here is it's bringing together a randomly selected but representative sample of the North of Tyne region. So it's quite different from other consultations or engagement processes that go on. Obviously, we promptly went into COVID and lockdown, and so we had to kind of pause the process while we thought about how we would deliver it in the light of COVID. We decided that we would come back to this and deliberately go out to tender and ask potential people who could deliver the Citizens Assembly about the different options for doing it, whether it would be some kind of hybrid online or offline approach, or an online only plan. And sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. The two key bits of the cabinet decision were, one, that we would hire in outside experts to do the actual Citizens Assembly, because it's quite a complex process in terms of something to deliver. It requires a lot of time, a lot of expertise, and it's something that we don't have in-house. And the other key thing, which I'll come to, is establishing an oversight panel to kind of oversee the process and make key decisions about it. So in terms of selecting the provider, we had a procurement process. It was a national advert. We had 8 different bids. Shared Future and Pete was the winning bid. So we've been very delighted to have him on board. And as I say, Shared Future have got a lot of experience. I believe they've run 35 different similar processes over the course of their lifetime. So that's a lot of experience here. The other thing that we set out to do, and that the cabinet decision required, was having an oversight panel, which is deliberately a mixture of an internal experts and external experts. So the internal experts are from the climate change experts in our 3 local authorities and the combined authority, and the external experts represent different stakeholders. So we've got a couple of academics, one who specialises in climate, one who specialises in citizens' assembly methodology. We've got representatives from business and the unions. We've got a representative from the voluntary sector. We've got a representative from environmental groups. So we've got a broad spread of people there. And the main aim of that oversight panel is really two key things. One is to make sure that one is to decide the question that the Citizens' Assembly are going to consider. So taking into account what the North of Tyne powers are going to be, and the fact that this is obviously going to be about climate change, but to try and kind of narrow it down a little bit. I'm pleased to say we had the first meeting of the oversight panel on the 26th of November, and the question that was agreed unanimously was, what should we do in the region, the North of Tyne region that is, to address climate change and its causes fairly, effectively and quickly. The next steps for the oversight panel are to agree the list of expert witnesses or commentators that the Citizens' Assembly will hear from. We're also asking them to have a look at the recruitment criteria that Shared Future are going to come up with for how we're going to select participants, and Pete can answer questions about how they're going to do that, and to just have a general oversight and guidance throughout the process. So we're anticipating a total of 4 meetings of the oversight panel over the lifetime of this project. And the only other thing to say is that we are looking to recruit in the new year and have the first session of the Assembly in February, and for it to have completed its work by April. So I'll stop there, and obviously very happy to take questions. And if there's logistical or kind of practical questions about the Citizens' Assembly, then Pete really is the best person to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll open that up to questions from members of the committee now. Any questions from members? No, I don't see anybody. Just the question I had, in terms of the Citizens' Assembly itself, I understand it's going to be, like anonymized, to get a fair representative of the demographics of the region on that. But in total, how many participants are going to be involved in the Citizens' Assembly?
So we're looking at having around 50. Drawn equally as we can from the 3 local authority areas. I think can I bring in Pete to just explain a little bit about how we're going to do that? Pete?
Sure. Hi everyone. So the recruitment process works in a certain way and has been largely accepted by most people that organise these processes over the years. So there's an organisation called the Sortition Foundation, an independent NGO that will deal with recruitment for it. So they'll be sending out 10,000 letters randomly using the Royal Mail database, and people will get those letters on their doorsteps through their letterboxes on the first week of January, and people will then invited to either go online and fill their details in, which would literally take probably about 45 seconds. Or they can ring a free phone number, and we'll take that information over the phone from them. All that data then goes into a computer at the Sortition Foundation, and then 50 people will be selected from those applicants that would reflect the diversity of the population across North of Tyne.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Any questions? No, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Tom, can I just ask, can we be assured that it will not be taken as a political side, that we're not going to, somebody may not get any political goodwill out of this? How can we monitor that?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand that.
Okay, then, so we're going out there canvassing views and getting the Citizens' Assembly here. Will it just be, I'm being diplomatic here for a change, okay? Could it be construed as somebody politicising the role?
Well, that is not the intention at all. What we really want to do with this process is to have a broad cross-section of the community. So a lot of engagement exercises, I'm sure you'll be familiar with, you often get extremes of opinion. So the people who really love an idea or really hate an idea. And often what is missing is that kind of middle ground. So what we're hoping to do with this is deliberately go out and make sure we get all strands of opinion. So it's not a party political exercise at all. It's an exercise in really deep consultation and asking people to think about the issues, to hear the evidence from independent experts, and to create their own recommendations. It's a very long and deep process, and we think it's about 30 hours of people's time. So it's not a short, quick kind of form that you fill in type consultation. It's a really deep, discursive one.
Absolutely fine. Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Chair. It's just in case somebody was to criticise at that particular time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I? Yeah. I mean, you talk about the consultation here. I'm thinking something like a planning consultation, for instance. Now, I tend to regard that as less of an opportunity to canvass people's opinions. This is what I tell my residents when they complain about planning decisions. I say, well, the consultation is not so much about canvassing your opinion as what you think. It's more about collecting evidence that's pertinent and relevant and can be corroborated. So how can we ensure that the people that we're getting this have actually got something worthwhile evidence that they can present, and that they're not just mouthing off opinions that are unsubstantiated? How do we ensure that we actually get some people with some genuine expertise in this?
Pete, would you like to answer that? You've got a lot of experience of doing this elsewhere.
Sure. I suppose there's two sets of experts in this process. I'd argue that one set is the citizens themselves, so they bring a huge wealth of expertise as residents in their own communities. And the second set of so we structure the process to make sure that they have lots of opportunities to talk to each other, to share opinions, ideas, to share the reality of their lives and what they hope for the future, and to challenge each other as well. So sometimes they argue, sometimes they agree, sometimes they reach consensus, sometimes they don't. That's one set of experts. The second set of experts is in terms of like a jury, is almost like the expert witnesses. So they would be selected by the oversight panel that Tom described, and they come and they bring their expertise and are cross-examined, if you like, by the members of the assembly. And then together, the assembly reflects on the expertise from within the group, but also the external expertise, and then tries to reach some consensus if possible, but eventually writes a set of recommendations that are then prioritized by the assembly itself.
Right. Just I would like to say, I think it's not really about opinions, it's about facts. And this is essentially a scientific problem. And I'd like to think that the majority of people on this have got a background in sort of physical science that can understand the chemistry, the physics, the engineering, the actual practicalities of it, rather than just a unsubstantiated opinion, you know. That's where I'm coming from. I'd like to make sure that this does actually canvass enough people who've actually got something that can, some expertise in this area. That's my only concern about it.
Well, I think in terms of the expertise that is in the process are the expert witnesses. So we will have people who are experts on climate science, people who are experts on the practical implications of it. I mean, this has been a kind of a thing that's happened elsewhere in citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries that have happened. But the point of the process, the actual assembly members are genuinely supposed to be, if you like, ordinary people, ordinary members of the public, because it's the point of this process is to kind of bring them on board, engage them in the process, and it's like you present them with evidence, you present them with arguments, they have a chance to consider it, and then they come up with their own verdict, their own recommendations. So that it's not the process itself is not supposed to be a kind of expert only process. They hear from experts, but it's supposed to be ordinary members of the public getting to decide their recommendations.
Any more?
That's not how science works, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
So just to maybe help clarify the situation a little bit, do you know, in terms of once the assembly, citizens' assemblies met and there's a list of recommendations from them, before anything you would say is enacted or adopted or anything, that would come through back the democratic processes of going through scrutiny and through cabinet before there's like a finalised list of recommendations that practically can be done within the combined authority's powers, because it might be a case of there's some recommendations that aren't really our responsibility as a combined authority, but it's more us using our convening ability and lobbying ability to either work with encourage local authorities to adopt a particular policy, or other groups and things like that. So I think it's just trying to reassure the committee that this isn't the end of it, that there's opportunity for this to come back with more detail at a later date.
Absolutely, Chair. And I think it's worth saying that the Citizens' Assembly powers are to recommend. They have no legal powers to enact anything. And the way the process has worked in other local authorities has been that you have recommendations produced by the Citizens' Assembly. They go through whatever democratic process has been agreed. In our case, we've agreed that they will come at least at some point to the North of Tyne Cabinet for consideration. And it's obviously entirely up to the Cabinet to decide which recommendations are appropriate, which aren't, and to explain why that's so. I think Pete's probably got experience of how that process has worked. It might be useful to add in.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what might be useful for any of the members on this call is that we always make sure that there's an observer slot for each of the sessions. So if anybody wants to come along and see the process in action and sit in the back on mute, then you'd be very, very welcome to see how it all works out.
Yeah, that might be something that's worthwhile discussing, like circulating an email around, scrutiny members at the time of, just so that they can see themselves of how the process has gone out and have reassurances. So when we see a list of recommendations, we can see how they were formulated. Just a question for Tom here, just in terms of the oversight panel, I do see the list of people, and you would say that they are the academic experts in their relevant fields, and that it does somewhat alleviate concerns of, maybe some elected members, not necessarily on this committee, but to a wider field, who were worried or concerned that it was just going to be, radicalized, you would say, for, their climate change campaigners, but they do seem quite moderate, reasonable people with professional experience in their relevant fields. The only thing that I would be critical on, just that this is my own personal opinion, that we do have a fair coverage on that, but it would have been nice to see if there was a representative, from the rural, like an expert on rurality and maybe an expert on urbanization, just because but I would say those are two fields in which climate change is completely different in those two areas. And it would have been good just to have somebody maybe on that expert oversight panel who could have brought those views to the table and amongst what questions to be asked. But I appreciate the process has already started.
I can reassure you, Chair, that the representative from the voluntary sector, Adrienne Attorp, is a PhD student as well as being a Tyne and Wear Citizens representative, and she has lots of experience of rural research and the kind of impacts on agriculture and rurality. So I think we have got that a little bit covered. But as you say, I mean, I think when you've got 10 people or 12 people, it's hard to cover absolutely every eventuality, and certainly we've striven to be as fair and as diverse as we can by having certainly a mixture of the different areas covered, the different parts of the North of Tyne region covered, different, bringing in academics and business and unions as well as environmental groups. So I think we have got a broad range of people, and certainly having been the secretariat for the oversight panel, I thought the first meeting that really came out that we had a bunch of experts who were enthusiastic about this process, bringing different perspectives, but able to come to a kind of shared agreement at the end of it. So I'm confident that we've got a good selection of people that will do good work for us.
Okay. Peter, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate really that and reassure that because we'll be definitely recruiting people from rural areas, their voices will be heard and they'll be pushing the agenda and making sure that their influence is there. So what we didn't mention was that the question's quite broad, but we're giving Assembly members themselves after session 4 the opportunity to be able to suggest what should be the focus of some of the remaining sessions. So they'll have an opportunity to guide things there as well. We've run a few climate change themed processes like this with a mix of urban and rural areas, and the rural participants are always very, very able to articulate what their own reality is and how that's going to impact on the issue under consideration.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? No, I don't see anybody. So are members happy to note as the recommendation, note this report, and that this will come back to a future overview and scrutiny committee, and that there's the opportunity for members, if they wish to be observers to the Citizens' Assembly, of which I'm sure we'll get more details around that nearer the time and can circulate that via email of members who are interested in doing that. So is everybody in favour of that? I see nodding heads. So, yeah. So thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Peter, and good luck. And it sounds quite an exciting project.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. So that leads us on to item 8, the Brexit update. And this morning we've got Rob Hamilton, who's our chief economist, presenting the report.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I'm conscious it's quite a big change of topic, but I guess that's the beauty that you and your colleagues have in terms of the committee. It feels quite a long time ago that I was last discussing Brexit with your committee. Unbelievably, it was actually this year. It was back in February, I think. But it does feel a lot has obviously happened since then. Henry mentioned before that we're approaching the Brexit endgame. I've just looked at the latest odds from the bookies, and there's a 66% chance that we are indeed approaching the end game in terms of a deal being thrashed out in the next few days. So I think all of us could be hopeful that they do sort of reach a kind of firm conclusion. Of course, if they don't reach a firm conclusion, then actually, the likelihood is that the negotiations will start once again at some point next year. So just in terms of today's discussion, sadly, I'm not able to provide any juicy tidbits from those meetings that are going on at the moment as we speak. But what I thought I'd do is very briefly touch on a recap of some of the issues that the committee have previously discussed, try and update on some of the work that has been undertaken by the Combined Authority. Obviously, we don't pretend to have powers beyond our sort of competencies and control in this area. And then thirdly, some next steps of where particularly the Cabinet members have asked us to go, because this was an issue that Cabinet discussed only a few weeks ago as well. So just in terms of background and a recap of where we are, I think we all know that we have left the EU. The current transition period ends at the end of this year. During this period, the transition period, not a lot has really changed. The rules and regulations affecting UK residents and businesses to a large extent reflect those which were in place prior to leaving the EU. But what we don't know is what's going to happen from the 1st of January next year, both in terms of the details around trade and some of the other regulatory issues, but also what the impact might be in terms of the economy. And I guess that's my particular interest. It feels quite a long time ago that the Treasury was producing economic forecasts about the impact of Brexit. And it is worth reminding the committee that the impact of Brexit is expected to be more significant in the northeast than any other part of the country, and that reflects the sectoral composition of the economy here, in particular the fact that we have high levels of exporting to the EU, and we also have quite a large number of foreign-owned companies within the area as well. In terms of some of the other issues, particularly ones that have been highlighted to us recently by businesses and those we've spoken to, although all the focus at the moment in the papers is, will there be a deal, won't there be a deal? It is worth highlighting that, some of these risks remain, and particularly remain for the Northeast, even if a trade deal is agreed. Deal, if it is agreed, will change the way that goods and services are transacted between the UK and the EU. There are genuinely some opportunities associated with Brexit, and sometimes they're a little bit harder to describe, but certainly there are opportunities in terms of supply chain consolidation. Companies that decide it's in their best interest to locate bits of the supply chain closer to the endpoint of production within the UK. And also, although sort of somewhat controversial at the moment, is the treatment of state aid or government intervention to support industry. And there's the potential that that could be directed towards the UK's top priorities. And I'd like to also stress that even if there is a deal, there will be changes for businesses. They will have to deal with new regulations in terms of new customs procedures at the ports, airports, and elsewhere. And so that, even if there is a deal, there will be changes for businesses, there will be changes for residents, there will be changes in terms of how we, as a combined authority and other organisations, potentially recruit staff from the EU. In terms of some of the work that the combined authority has been undertaking, often with partners across the public and private sector, made sure that there's been quite a wide range of advice and guidance available to businesses, including through the LEPS Growth Hub and a number of the private sector networks as well. From the combined authority's point of view, I've mentioned that foreign-owned firms, inward investing in the region has been particularly important. Councillor Pickard has talked about this earlier in this meeting as well. And it's really important that we do remain an attractive destination for these firms. The combined authority has increased its inward investment fund, which is great, and it's also about the wider offer that can be provided to businesses, which is important. I'd like to highlight also the opportunities associated with hopefully being one of the country's free ports. So government has launched a competition to select at least 7 free ports in England. Expect to see some in the devolved administrations as well. And the idea of a free port is that it provides an opportunity for companies to have, if you like, more efficient and more effective, less bureaucratic customs procedures. They mightn't pay import duties until the good moves from the free port into the UK. It can be particularly attractive for companies that are looking to import and export goods and components before producing a final product. In terms of what happens next, I mean, obviously a lot is very dependent on what happens in terms of the Brexit negotiations. The Combined Authority Cabinet agreed to work closely with businesses and to sort of stay close to the issues and to to be aware of the risks and also alive to opportunities, including, of course, inward investment opportunities. In this meeting, we've already talked about, your members have already talked about the importance of Shared Prosperity Fund and other funding sources that come along, and directing them to have the most important beneficial impact post Brexit or post withdrawal agreement is particularly important. It's important that we stay close to businesses, ports, airport, just to understand if any issues were to emerge. Certainly the discussions led by the chief execs and the local authorities, Paul Hanson, it's important to make sure that the disruption isn't in place. Certainly the Northeast ports are very confident that they've got their procedures well in place and they've been tested. And sort of nationally, there's much greater expectation of disruption at the ports in the southeast. And indeed, there's maybe opportunities to get more of the goods that are consumed in the northeast actually imported through the northeast as well. So Chair, that's all I really wanted to mention, just to highlight that unfortunately we probably don't know an awful lot more than we did back in February, but obviously the end point hopefully is getting closer. We've been staying close to businesses, trying to make sure that they are able to prepare as best as they can, and we stand ready to to promote any messages in the next few weeks should a deal be agreed.
Thanks for that, Rob. Yeah, it does seem a complete lifetime ago when we last had Brexit on the agenda, and it's quite interesting because it's topical time to be discussing this again. But rightfully so, COVID and economic recovery for the region has taken precedence. But I do think we need to keep our eye on the ball on this as well, because it does potentially open up risk to the region as well, and we just need to make sure that we can get as many safeguards in place as possible if required. And I'll open it up to questions or comments from the committee. Any questions or comments? I don't see anybody, so I'll just fire off a question to Rob. In terms of, you're talking about the Freeport proposal of it being multi-site across the region and possibly incorporating the airport as well. Is that meaning a possibility that all ports in the northeast region would fall under the one category, even considering, the small ports on coastal towns that we've got? Because it would seem a bit bizarre to have some ports in the region as part of a free port if we were going for a multi-site approach and then others not to be included. Because if you look at like localized small scale economy, there are businesses that rely on these small ports to trade with Europe. So it would be a bit silly to not include the prospect of including them. And that's just my question for you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Chair. It's fair to say that since the report was first produced, we now know more about government's competition for selecting those 7 free ports, and it's a relatively sort of complicated model that has been proposed by government, but actually in some ways it picks up some of the elements of the Northeast proposition. So I think the feeling of my colleagues is that actually we're in a reasonably good position at the moment as we pull together a proposition for the Northeast. In terms of the government prospectus, they have announced that there's effectively 2 types of sites which a free port can consist of. Firstly, there's tax sites. So these are sites on which businesses located on that tax site will benefit from tax incentives, specifically national insurance contributions, employers' national insurance contributions being reduced or paid, and business rate discounts. In addition to tax sites, there will also be what are called custom sites. And so the custom sites are, if you like, the areas that would benefit from enhanced and smoother customs procedures. And of course, there's the opportunity to have your tax site as a custom site or part of your tax site as part of a custom site. So there's almost infinite numbers of combinations. You're allowed a maximum of 3 tax sites in the region, but you're allowed as many custom sites as makes sense. Obviously, if the model becomes too complicated, then it becomes too complicated to administer, costly to administer in terms of the sort of necessary technology, automatic number plate recognition along routes they use from ports to sites and the like. For custom sites in particular, and your sort of question mentioned specifically about this opportunity being available to a number of ports in the region, there would be costs that the operators and owners of those sites would have to incur in terms of security, in terms of monitoring goods, in terms of erecting a fence and potentially separating the custom site from some of the other arrangements. So the process that's being undertaken at the moment and led by the LEP over the wider region is to, if you like, issue a call for sites to come forward. So going through the local authorities who are in contact with their ports and businesses and landowners to try and help pull together the best possible proposition for the region.
Thanks for that, Tom. So just to break down as a supplementary somewhat, in all reality, the 3 tax sites, as if we have a multi-site approach, is in reality going to be the big ports that do the most trade in the region. But does sound like there's opportunity for getting the custom sites to possibly include all ports in the region if they so wished and made the approach and had the conversations with the relevant teams and the constituent authorities or with yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, certainly, I'd encourage them to come forward with a proposal, and it can then be evaluated. It's really important that we bring the best possible assets forward to government. We have to remember that there's sort of 20 major ports in England, and at least another 40, 50 other ports, and so the competition for this is quite intense. So actually, it's particularly important that we get one of these free ports in the region, and that's probably the first and foremost, the most important priority as far as I'm concerned as well.
Yeah, and just as a final point on the free port side of things, presumably there's been some form of engagement with every port or airport in the region just to make them aware of what's going on, and obviously, if they wish, encourage them to make a bid or case for being included.
There should have been, but I'm more than happy to speak to any port or any other business that wants further information.
Any more questions for Rob this morning? No, just one question that I've got, which might not really be relevant for this item, but links in somehow. Are we doing anything to support, micro and small businesses that could potentially be completely decimated by if there is tariffs and custom fees brought in through a new deal? Is there any infrastructure in place on the regional level to support them and prevent them closing down essentially?
Well, it's absolutely vital that we maintain those small businesses. They're particularly important in terms of some communities, and of course, big businesses have to start off as small businesses at some point as well. So we need to make sure that there's all sorts of businesses thriving within the region. I think it's fair to say that when we've spoken to businesses and their representative organisations, that the majority of those smaller businesses haven't really prepared for Brexit or the end of the withdrawal agreement, in part because they just mightn't have the capacity and time to undertake scenario planning. They don't know yet what the future trading arrangements will be. I think if there are particular businesses that yourself or other members are concerned about, please make sure they're highlighted to the local authority or the combined authority. It might be there's things we can do in terms of access to advice and support, but certainly we need to monitor and to understand the situation, and we certainly want to make sure that our small businesses continue to be able to trade with the EU.
Thank you. And I'll just do one final call for any questions or comments for Rob, and then if I don't see anybody, so I'll close this agenda item. And thank you very much for coming to the meeting this morning, Rob, and it's been good to have you present on the latest information, even though not much further forward since when we last had you. But I think it's important to, on the other side of Christmas and the New Year, possibly look to, maybe even if it's just an email update, just getting the latest information from yourself at that point in time. And if I don't speak to you or communicate with you beforehand, I hope you do have a somewhat enjoyable time over the festive period as much as you can, and take care and keep in touch.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks. So that takes us on to item 9, the 6-month review of the 2020-21 budget, and also with this is the Q2 budget monitoring for this year. And this morning we've got Janice Gillespie with us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the 6 months position of the combined authority, and it's set out in the standard format in terms of reporting of the overall position. I'll just cover the key highlights from the report. So on page 40 of the report papers, the corporate budget, what you're seeing there is variations on staffing budget and service level agreements, with costs on external advisors and other costs associated with kind of some of the spend that was delayed from 2019-20 into 2021. But overall, a small expenditure overspend on some costs. That in part is associated with additional costs associated with the Brownfield Housing Fund. So you see in the income that we've got a new income stream in respect of the Brownfield housing sites funding of 195,000. So that offsets some of that additional costs in the expenditure lines. Overall, we've got additional mayoral capacity fund, which we hadn't been anticipating, increased to £1 million for 2021. So that's seen as a variation. So what we've done overall is reduce the contribution from the investment fund, therefore to keep the overall income on balance and the corporate budget on balance as a position statement. In terms of the investment fund, you've heard earlier of some of the activity that's been delivered through the year and into the future. So table 2 sets out kind of a summary of the current commitments as Bruce set out. So 40 million committed to date and an overall funding allocation of 90 million. The other 10 million is the top slice contribution to the corporate budget in table 2 there. And then table 3 sets out in a bit more detail where we think the investment fund will end up this financial year. Overall spend of just over, well, just close to 16 million for 2021. So not an insignificant, kind of a relatively small variation from the original budget forecast. We also then include an update on the adult education budget. So table 4 sets out that the part year effect in 2021, we do anticipate a spend as planned. That said, there are a number of the organisations that are facing challenges in terms of service delivery. So we continue to monitor those and enable some realignment to those procurements in order to ensure it's matched with delivery, being cognizant of the challenges that COVID has brought. Little bit more detail there on the Brownfield Housing Fund. So hopefully you're aware we've got 24 million of a new fund to spend over the next 5 years, including this year, and a small amount of revenue funding of £500,000. We've profiled the revenue funding at the moment over a couple of years, but we do anticipate having to spend the majority of it in this financial year. So, and that is about bringing the sites into preparation, ensuring that they are appropriately appraised, and some of that will be spent on supporting the 3 constituent authorities, ensuring they have the capacity as well to make sure the sites are ready and ready to go live. No material changes to reserves at this point in time. I guess the other thing to point out, sorry, I'm just scrolling back to paragraph 1.3, the business rate pilots. You'll be aware during 1920 we had the 75% business rate retention pilot for 1 year only. That has created 4.8 million of surplus to come back into the combined authority, and it's been agreed to redistribute that back to the constituent authorities in order that they can take relevant actions with that funding in terms of supporting the pandemic response. And then the Treasury Management update is included at this time. Nothing really to say of significance. Clearly, investment rates are fairly low, but we continue to be, I guess, really effective in terms of securing the best investment rates possible, because we do have surplus cash at this point in time, but cognizant of the risks associated with investments, and continue to do that to maximise the income to the authority. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members? Councillor Stone.
Thanks, Chair. I see there's been mentioned in the report in relation to the Joint Transport Committee. I was wondering if you had any views on behalf of the authority in terms of the the situation with regard to JTC's budget, because I think there are some issues there in terms of the deficits forecast for Nexus over the next couple of years. Is that something that North of Tyne have had any sort of dialogue with the JTC about, or is that something that you have any particular professional views on?
Well, I guess it's not expressly as North of Tyne, but certainly the 5 Tyne and Wear authorities dialogue with Nexus and NECA on the joint transport position. So we have regular dialogue with John Fennick around what that looks like, what the potentials are in terms of what actions need to be taken in terms of managing that position. So that's a regular feature of the Treasurer's conversations as a group of 5.
Okay.
In terms of the budget setting process and indeed the monitoring during the year. So absolutely we're party to those discussions.
Fair enough. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Any more questions? No, I just got one for Janice.
Yeah.
On page 41 under staffing, we're talking about there's been 4 new key posts, 2 new appraisal and monitoring officers. Now, I remember at the time that there was some people, not necessarily within the combined authority, but and constituent authorities who were querying a bit of confusion about what those were, confusing the role of, the statutory monitoring officer with, like a program or project monitoring officer. So is it possible that their job title could be looked at to include somehow, appraisal and whatever the monitoring, whether it be a project or program, just so it doesn't differentiate from the statutory monitoring officer?
Understood. Yeah, understood. Yeah,
Thanks
that's fine. Yeah.
Then the next one that I had in terms of this report, sorry. And borrowing, powers of borrowing. I know that we've got the powers of borrowing jointly with the JTC in terms of transport. But with, COVID recovery and us having quite an ambitious ask of government for powers and budgets, is there any prospect, do you think, in your professional opinion, that we might get some form of borrowing powers?
That's certainly a dialogue I'm still having with BASE. So I'm trying to progress that. I think because of all the activity that's been going on more recently, that conversation's been a little difficult to progress. But certainly I need to pick that up with them in the new year. I think the only issue with the borrowing powers was that our name wasn't on the list at the time that the borrowing powers were given to combined authorities, because we simply weren't in existence at that time. So I just need to pick that up and ensure that that's progressed and gets put in place, because I think you're absolutely right. I think, we do want to support the COVID recovery and the economic recovery, and there are appropriate circumstances where we could undertake borrowing at a fairly, it would be a fairly low level of borrowing. Nevertheless, it would allow the 20 million a year that we get to go that bit further in terms of supporting the region.
And also, it's just semantically, when you compare us to other combined authorities, that we're not viewed as being, a second-rate combined authority, that we do have the same powers that they have. So thanks for taking that up. The final point I had in this report was just in terms of, investments, and I see that on the list of potential investments does include UK local authorities. Now, given that we've had COVID this year, that I think I read somewhere there was one council that was having bad finances that another local authority invested in that was concerned. So would it be possible, and I appreciate like commercial sensitivity, perhaps, that a list to the committee could be circulated around of, what local authorities, if any, we've invested in and how much, and what the risk is potentially, like a professional opinion yet on that? Thank you. And that's all I had in terms of this report. So does anybody else have any questions or comments? No. So are members happy to note the report from Janice this morning? Yeah, I see nodding heads, so I'll take that as approved. So then that takes us on to item 10, initial budget proposals. And again, this is a report from Janice.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I guess the budget monitoring report, the 6-month position report, very much, I guess, segues into the initial budget proposals in terms of the baseline funding assessment that we've done, reviewing all the establishment and doing the detailed work with the organisation in terms of what things could look like for the next financial year. Clearly, the budget for North of Tyne is very different from local authority budgets in that, you know, we know we're going to get the 20 million, we know we're going to get the adult education budget, and the key thing being how the authority is choosing to spend that money. So we've drafted the corporate budget based on updated staffing assumptions in light of the various activities that are being undertaken. At this stage, we have not assumed the mayoral capacity fund will continue, because that was only ever supposed to be kind of a 2-year fund. So we're not expecting that to continue into 21-22, but I know that there is lobbying going on currently to try and secure that additional mayoral funding to continue. And clearly what that would probably do would just displace some of the investment fund that is top sliced to support the corporate budget. I guess what we've also done is we've inserted some assumptions on the transport levy, but that is simply the expenditure and the income that net off to zero within the corporate budget. And we work in line with the overall transport committee's timelines in terms of the approvals around that. In terms of the draft investment fund, that's very much based on following on from the work as to exactly where the fund is, what the plans are in terms of the different programmes, what's been approved to date, and working with all of the teams in terms of understanding how we anticipate the profile of spend developing over the next couple of years. Sorry, excuse me. So on table 2, we've set out the current estimate of what that plan looks like. And what I've included is the previous year's position for the initial 2 years of the organisation to give an indication of where the investment fund could be by the time we get to the 5-year gateway review. And what's suggesting at the minute is potentially there is an unspent amount, if you like, against that total 100 million of around 22 million. I guess the challenge that we have was 18-19 was only 3 months of a financial year. So what's going to be interesting is that the dialogue that we have around truly is it 4 years or 5 years, and quite how that gateway process is going to work for us. But I wanted to kind of start to bring a picture in of what that overall profile of spend looks like, and what we need to keep an eye on longer term. In terms of the adult education budget, members will be aware that certainly at this point in time we've awarded grants and we've awarded a range of procured services, and there is that administrative element to the budget. It's a flatlined budget, so in terms of funding income, so we aren't expecting to receive any inflationary increases. So what the overall programme will have to do is to continue to manage any inflationary pressures from either providers or in grants in terms of negotiating what can be delivered into future years as a result of those any pressures around that. So really that's just a reflection of the baseline adult education budget we expect to continue to receive. The Brownfield Housing Fund, not really a lot to add compared to what I spoke about in terms of the monitoring position. So 24 million that we will obviously continue to monitor now as we progress delivery during this financial year and into next. I think we'll have some challenges in terms of the timescales of delivery expected certainly for this year, the 5 million. So we will ensure we continue to work with BAYS to secure any flexibility with on that. I guess one of the challenges is this is the first real express capital programme of funding that we've had for the combined authority. So we don't have perhaps flexibilities that other organisations might have, where they are able to, I guess, be more creative around some of the funding and use funding swaps to maximise the opportunity of ensuring that spending targets are met. So we'll just have to make sure that we achieve the delivery in 2021 and 22 and dialogue with the BAs wherever possible if we need a little bit of flexibility. And the only other thing I would highlight is that at this stage, in terms of the LEP accountable body proposals, so just setting out there kind of the headline figures in terms of the actual accountable body part of our budgets with the LEP. So 116,000 expenditure budget, which is substantially funded by contributions from the 7 LA7 local authorities and interest on the North East Investment Fund income, which is interest into the LEP itself. So that's a balanced budget at this stage. I've had initial approvals from certainly discussion with the LA7 treasurers on the continuation of the £10,000 a month. And that will just continue into 21-22 at this stage. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Janice. I see that we've also got Katie on the meeting as well. I was just, thank you for coming to the meeting. I was just going to ask if, was there anything else you had to highlight or raise? I think your mic's off, sorry.
Thank you. No, I think Janice has covered everything in there. Like I say, the budget proposals are as laid out, and the brownfield housing is a new fund. I think they're the key points to mention. But we'll keep you updated with the Q3 budget monitoring and going forward on the final budget proposals.
Thank you. So I'll open up to questions of the committee now. Any members got any questions? Can't see anybody. So I just had one, just in terms of, the draft corporate budget.
Yeah.
Just to prevent, cynics out there, in terms of, the growth of the organisation over the 4 years, how the Mayor's office has got an increase of £17,000 over the 4-year period. Presumably that's just in line with, whatever inflation is or cost. It's not a plan to suddenly increase staff, because you get a lot of staff for £17,000.
No. There are inflationary increases assumed at this stage.
I just thought it'd be helpful for the organisation just to reiterate those points. And the other thing, I know that we're the accountable body for both the LEP and the Invest North East England.
Yep. Yes.
So, do you know when we next have the LEP on the agenda, and we've got Helen and Lucy, their new chair, coming? Would it be possible to perhaps look at having something on Invest North East England as well? Just perhaps have a look at their activity and just have the committee engage with whomever's currently running that.
Yeah.
And I think that was everything I had, aside from just to remind the committee to note the budget setting timetable for this year, which is the appendix to the report. And of course that we've got the budget workshop session in January, and then the budget will be on our agenda for the meeting in February as well. And
Chair, it's probably remiss of me. I should have said also a couple of other things. At this stage, there is no proposal for the raising of a precept. So that isn't included in the proposals at the moment, and it's not expected that one will come forward. And I have a couple of budget engagements set up. The first one, taking part in conversations with the community and voluntary sector. I think that's next week, and then specifically with joining the conversations that I had with the business sector. And I know we are publishing publishing on the website just more details around the budget proposals. Should anybody wish to take part in a bit of engagement on the website.
Yeah, and just in response to that, in terms of the engagement sessions, I do appreciate that you did pick up, or the organisation picked up on the recommendations and comments from the Scrutiny Committee last year. That last year's budget was really just the operational budget of getting the organisation going again, but that we are starting to look at engaging with our relevant partners of what their opinions on the budget. And just as a reminder that there is an opportunity for any concerned residents in the area who might have burning questions to ask in terms of the budget, that there's the prospect for them to engage directly with the combined authority on that. So thank you to you and Katie for your work on that. And I'm guessing there's no more questions on that. And with that, a member's happy to note this report and note the budget timetable for this year as well. Yep, I see heads shaking. So thanks. Thank you to both you and Katie for always attending our meetings and giving us useful updates and reports. And likewise, if I don't see or hear from you before the new year, I hope that you can both have a good time over Christmas. And I think you're free to go now if you wish from the meeting.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So that leads us on to bringing back agenda item 5B. And unfortunately, I've received an update during the course of the meeting that Councillor Nick Forbes, the leader in Newcastle City Council, who is the Combined Authorities Cabinet Member for Business Competitiveness, the meeting that he was in at the start is unfortunately overrun and he's unable to attend the meeting today. But I would say that we obviously send out the opportunity to invite him back to a future meeting, and it's whether it matches with his calendar on that. But I think it would be fair to give him the opportunity to attend a future meeting. But with us to give the report in his absence is Dr. Henry Kippen, who we've heard from earlier on in the meeting.
Chair, excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask, we've just had somebody join the meeting on a telephone. I would just like them to identify themselves to the committee, please.
Sorry, it's Katie Ling. I lost connection on my laptop, so I just joined by the phone.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Katie. That was fine.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, Henry, over to you.
I like that brief, mysterious interlude. I was wondering who that might be. So Chair, Committee, I'm really happy to run through quickly the paper. I should say thanks to the team. Actually, there's a good and comprehensive paper on the portfolio. And in brief, I'm sure Councillor Forbes would want me to note that this portfolio is in a way the counterpart to the investment fund overview that Councillor Pickard walked through earlier. There is some overlap with what he walked through, and in particular, Councillor Forbes' portfolio around business competitiveness emphasises those investments we're making that are about cross-sector innovation, about how we stimulate entrepreneurship, and how we invest in activities that represent the future of our economy, I suppose you would say. So there's a really heavy emphasis here towards initiatives that are digital, that are about that transition to clean energy and green growth, that are really relevant. And this part of the discussion, which I know committee have alighted on a few times, around where the next phase of jobs are going to come from. So those kind of jobs and businesses of the future really is a big focus here. And within that, the transition to net zero that all of our authorities have made a commitment around, and our need to support that mix of great research and development and really create the conditions for social and economic entrepreneurship in the region is the big focus. In terms of the walkthrough, you'll see some of this represented in section 2 of the paper, which introduces the portfolio, the priorities within it. There are 3 things really to emphasize here. One is the digital portfolio, which I'll go into in a moment. One is the ageing economy and the opportunity that represents. That's a slightly slower burn for us in terms of what's come through in terms of cabinet decisions so far. And green growth, which is a bit of a catch-all term, which we at the Combined Authority would split into a number of programs that look at very tangible initiatives around offshore wind infrastructure and innovation on the one hand, and then this innovation in creating a Green New Deal fund, which I'll come to in a moment. Within that is the implicit desire really to build on the assets that we've already got. So again, I've said this before, none of what we're doing should be starting from scratch. Really, we have fantastic innovation assets. For example, our National Innovation Centre for Data, which is dating. A National Innovation Centre for Dating really would be something, wouldn't it? Data is what I meant to say, which is at the heart of some of the digital work that we're doing. So really the three areas here are the Digital Growth and Innovation Programme, which is a headline 10 million programme as per Cabinet approval in the early stages of this year. The development of a Green New Deal Fund, again, 10 million headline allocation to a kind of really innovative approach to how we stimulate carbon reduction and new business ideas. And then, as I talked about, a kind of some thinking and project development, which is going on under the bonnet, really, in terms of the development of the ageing economy. So to pick up on the first of those, in the digital sector work, we've done and led by Councillor Forbes quite a lot of early engagement. I mean, a fair bit of this was before I walked through the door, actually, but some good sector engagement with what is quite a mature digital sector in this region, and even this part of the wider region, both in terms of the larger businesses that work in this sector, Sage and Accenture being two of a number of examples, and the culture around digital startups and scale-ups and innovation. We have quite a lot of networks and organisations that are involved in that space, and some of what we'll come to is designed to invest in their capacity to support growth. But what the sector told us really was that there were four areas that would support future growth, and they range from people and talent and digital readiness. So there's a skills element in there, but that's also about attracting talent and making sure we're ready for change. Ideas, technology, digital adoption. So the key investments there are in supporting very, very practical digital adoption techniques to help businesses survive over the current period. Investment in the ecosystem. So we know that the growth of digital economies across the world has been done in clusters. It's absolutely the way to do this, to grow a sector and a number of organisations who can share talent, bounce off each other, and create that kind of rolling ball of a sector that's got a real future here. And then development of a narrative and future proofing. And in a way, some of that's about shouting about what we've got as a region in the North of Tyne. Sometimes the Northeast has struggled to make itself heard, but actually we have one of the fastest growing digital sectors in the country. And some of what we're doing is to try and build the capacity to be able to make a big deal of that. So you'll see in section 3 primarily quite a bit of detail on the projects that have come within that in terms of digital adoption. 0.75 million of North of Tyne Combined Authority money has gone towards a project which is being run by the Digital Catapult in the region, which is supporting kind of basic and advanced digital adoption for businesses, which is, you know, as obviously we're being told, as I'm sure you all are very aware of, that's absolutely critical, and that's doing something for even the smallest of businesses who need help to get online and put their functions online and be able to work in digital ways, which is of course as much about the way you work as it is about the technology. We have invested in our capacity to support the use of big data to drive productivity, which is a really exciting part of our work. So our National Innovation Centre for Data is now engaged in a programme which is quite a big programme actually for the scale of resource that we've put in, which is looking at how you can make sure that our companies can take advantage of this big data revolution, and that we are using the skills and talent that the National Centre is incubating to the benefit of our businesses. We're starting to see a really good private sector engagement into that as well, and you'll note in the report that Sage is one of our bigger businesses have pledged to work with us or really build on what we are doing, I should say is the right way of saying that, with a 1.4 million programme to support COVID recovery for businesses using some of their products and software. So we're seeing some real private sector buy into what we're doing, which I think is great. And then the most recent element of that, we'll just alight on for a second, is a 5 million call for projects which are designed to support the ecosystem. Now, I know we talked about a little bit about buzzwords before, and you couldn't get more buzzword than digital ecosystem. But essentially, what we've done is, excuse me, put out a call for proposals which is now halfway through the process. So we've got lots of initial expressions of interest back, which are of really quite high quality actually. And the whole point of that really is to ask, how could our investment add most value to boost the power of our networks and support faster growth in this sector, in the spectrum from small startups that need to grow to the kinds of things that are needed to support the bigger enterprises and make sure they stay in the region. So I'd be very happy at a future ONS to come back with some more detail on what's come down the line. And of course, Cabinet and Investment Panel will be involved in the process of taking real projects through, but that's a really exciting area for us. It's worth noting that on digital infrastructure and digital skills, there's also quite a lot of activity. So 12 million's going into full fibre connectivity in Northumberland primarily, but that's a North of Tyne project, obviously with the partnership in Northumberland. And digital skills are very much a part of our AEB work, as Janice and others set out earlier. We're also doing a bit of work on skills for future growth, which we think was right to take a step back from through COVID and say, well, how does the skills picture look like, and where can we add value given the amount of national money in the system now, particularly around adult education. So if that's digital, then the second is green growth. And as I said, we've got a range of things going on, which range from really tangible shoring up portside infrastructure to make sure that our existing companies can keep jobs and continue to grow. And the really innovative side of this, as I'm sure Councillor Forbes would want me to know, is in doing what lots of places and authorities have talked about, which is to substantiate what a Green New Deal might look like. And we're actually putting some investment and some innovation in that space. So Cabinet have approved a headline 10 million for a Green New Deal fund, which would be about stimulating private enterprise and other initiatives which would create new jobs in low carbon sectors effectively. Now, again, this is a really, we've asked for innovation here, and we're halfway through a process. We have calls for proposals back in, some very credible proposals which are about effectively matching and multiplying the North of Tyne contribution and creating a pipeline, almost like a venture capital pipeline of initiatives that could help us to support new jobs within this growing sector. So again, I'll be happy to bring that through when that's turned into tangible delivery and decision making, but that's a really exciting initiative. And the three areas that the projects will be focusing on are around decarbonising heat, decarbonising transport, decarbonising industry, reflecting where we know the bulk of carbon emissions are coming from. So I know Councillor Forbes, given the emphasis he's put on net zero transition for the city in Newcastle as well as for the region, would want to emphasise that actually we can't solve the whole problem given the scale of what a transition to net zero would actually require and what a fair transition would require. But what we can do is show some leadership and show what innovation might look like, and provide a stimulus for the private sector to help us to, and the social sector to help us to do that in the region. So that's a really exciting initiative. And then I've noted here in the report, the section 5 is an update on our ageing sector and forward look, which is short, but that reflects quite a lot of work that's going on under the surface to understand really where the combined authority could add best value in what we know will be a growth sector, not just because of the fact that we've got population change that the scientists will tell you is fairly certain over the next few years, but because we have massively international, I would say, health assets and a real investment base there. And we know that the ageing economy, i.e. the development of products and services for older people, whether that is in the health and care space or whether that's more widely, just the things that a new generation of older people will want to use. We know there's a big opportunity there for the North of Tyne to steal a march. We have a National Innovation Centre for Ageing that's been set up in this region. But of course, it's important that we really understand where our value add is and that we understand the tangible benefits to our businesses and our people here in the region. So there's quite a lot of development work going on in that space at the moment. And then I would emphasise finally, part of Councillor Forbes' portfolio includes the work that Rob's been doing, thinking about the impacts of Brexit and what that might mean in terms of how we need to adapt. I won't repeat anything Rob said, but again, that's one area where we're one of many players that are going to have to be involved in supporting recovery. And I would say this portfolio is a really core part of how the authority will do that, because of the fact that we've got such kind of hefty, in our terms, investments going through, and they are so focused on innovation and what comes next. So I hope that is a chair is a reasonable run through it, and I'm really happy to take questions. I'm also happy to pass those back to Councillor Forbes if that's more appropriate as well.
Thank you for that, Henry. So I'll open that up to questions from the committee. Any, Councillor Stone?
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, I hope we can get Councillor Forbes back to a future meeting. I would like to ask him some. I'll spare the officers this one, but I would, if he was here, I would be asking about what he felt the key drivers were for business competitiveness in the sub-region. I won't ask that to the officers, but I will ask this one. One of the things that I think is one of the key drivers is going to obviously be making sure we have a good skills offer to respond to the needs of business for business growth.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask officers whether they had any thoughts on whether there was sufficient labour market intelligence being generated within the region or the sub-region to customise our approach based on what the specific needs of the sub-region are in that respect. And any particular sort of thoughts on that front would be useful.
I'm happy to take the first half of that question, but I hope Rob's also on the call, who I know will have a good, mature view on this. That is a fantastic question. I would say my answer would be we probably have, we certainly have good quality labour market intelligence. Whether it's of the depth and is of the currency that you would need is another question, but that exists. However, the main thing here is the alignment between that intelligence, a version of what our businesses are likely to need now and in future, and the pace with which we can create skills interventions which are aligned with both. And I think probably the answer is, if you were to ask, do we have all of those pieces of the puzzle in place? I think you're quite right in hinting at the fact that we don't. What we as a team have tried to do is make sure that every investment that is allocated by Cabinet, in fact, I say we as a team, the political team have been really very clear about this too, but pretty much everything that's gone through Cabinet has an element of skills investment in there, even if that's one small part of a wider pot, because we know that we're going to need to bring through what we've called a kind of skills for growth, almost that mini commission, which says, right, where are we now? What does post-COVID recovery look like? What are our businesses going to need? Do we have enough alignment and pace within the system to be able to create the skills throughput? Because you're quite right that the way things currently work across the wider region, I don't think gives us enough agility in the context that we're in. So that's just that's probably a personal view on something that Councillor Forbes would give a political view on. On the point about the data in particular and the quality of that and how that might need to be improved, Rob, do you have anything to add on that, or even contradict what I've just said?
No, I think, Henry, I think that was right. I mean, I'm definitely of the belief that skills is the most important determinant, certainly of inward investment and probably of growth as well. I think I agree with you also, Henry, that there is sort of quite good labour market intelligence, but it can sometimes be quite hard to interpret and get underneath. So certainly, sort of two of the areas that we're being told that there are shortages of skills around the green economy. So take a specific example, government's green homes grant. We know that uptake of vouchers or indeed supply of housing retrofit measures has been limited by the availability of materials, but actually also skills, just physically people who could implement and fit those measures. Advanced digital skills as well is an area. So Henry's sort of mentioned about some of the work the combined authority is doing in that area. I think I'll just one other thing to add, which is one of the advantages of the combined authority having control of the adult education budget is not just the ability to directly influence how some of the AEB is spent, but it's about having a meaningful relationship with colleges and other providers. And I think by having that depth of relationship with them, there's, I hope, going forward, the opportunity for some more sort of more both mature discussions, but actually also to join up discussions. We know that the colleges have extensive networks and within the private sector, but we also know that sometimes some of that labour market intelligence isn't as joined up as it could be. And my hope is that over time, and perhaps through the fact that we have a seat around the table, because the AEB will be able to help connect up that intelligence and get better outcomes.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for the response on for both of you on that. So, I'm showing my age here a little bit, but one of my first graduate job was in economic consultancy. And I was one of my responsibilities was going through the various labour market intelligence reports produced by what was then the Trading and Enterprise Councils, which is going back to the sort of the mid and late 90s, and that, those were I thought quite useful sort of sources of info, which gave policymakers and gave education providers a reasonable sort of opportunity to mesh in their activity and their funding bids, particularly for that purpose. And I don't get the sense there is as much of that out there as they might have been then. And if there's something that may be worth looking at, whether there was a need to commission any particular sort of sub-regional exercise on that, to have some kind of annual sort of not an observatory, but just a sort of a report on terms of what the picture is like out there and how that could be sort of based on data. That would be useful, I think.
I think if I may, Chair, I think that is spot on, and we're working through exactly that question at the moment. What more do we need to do in order to fill either the gaps in intelligence or create that really specific sense of how that might translate into what we can do? We might not need a huge commission on the future of skills and productivity in the region, but it's a question of, well, if not that, then what is our version of that? How do we fill those gaps? And I think your point is absolutely right. One of the things, if we call a spade, one of the things that we have to grapple with as a North of Tyne combined authority within a region more widely is that the different levels at which some of the analysis is collated and brought together, and that's certainly not possible for us to do that. I'm not trying to make any malign points about that, but some of this intelligence is collected at a level. We've obviously got sector-specific work. We've got our combined authority, which is as you say, a sub-region within a region more widely that's treated as a functional kind of go-to-work area or functional economic area in some analyses. So there's a bit of unpicking and repicking to be done, and I wouldn't suggest that we're there, but that's going to be really critical in what we do next. And because we're not going to be able to change the world with the quantum of money that we have, being really surgically about how that's used, you're quite right, is absolutely critical. I'd really welcome input into that as we're thinking it through. Okay. So if that's something you'd be prepared.
Yeah, I might come back to you at some point about that. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions, Councillor Fairley?
Yeah, I think just sort of following on from what Greg's just been asking there, what I'd like to know is how flexible are we in, when we choose a horse to back, if it doesn't come off, how flexible are we and able to adapt to different market conditions? Because goes out saying that the world has changed an awful lot even in the last 6 months. And if you're going to be competitive in business, you need a sort of unique selling point, and I'm wondering, in these sectors that we've chosen to back here, what's our USP that gives us the competitive advantage? I mean, specifically here, I'm looking at the digital economy and I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's great, there's lots of opportunities in the digital sector, but then everybody else has realized this as well, and it seems that every other city in Britain is also hoping to make a lot out of investing in the digital economy. And I wonder just how big is it for us? And the other thing is, take the green industries and the offshore industry. I don't know if you're familiar with the debacle in Scotland over at the company Bifab, who, to give you a little bit of background, that owned a couple of sort of oil module fabrication yards in Fife, were hoping to get a contract to build wind turbines directly off the coast of Fife, so close to these yards you could probably row out in a rowing boat. But they've been undercut by competition from the Far East, who've got huge yards who can turn these things out, bang them out on the production line, and sell them to us at 2/3 the price we can build them. So what I'm saying is, what's our USP here, and what happens if something doesn't come off?
Yeah. So Chair, there's a lot in that question, and I won't attempt to suggest the answer will be sufficient. But just to pick up a couple of those points, so part of what I think Councillor Fairley's asking is, why have we backed these particular horses, and everything that Cabinet has chosen to do has its roots in an independent evidence base that was commissioned quite a way back. Again, that was before I walked through the door. But there was a good swathe of work done to look at what our comparative advantages might be across the sectors, what the sectors needed to grow, and what the benefits that might be that have gone into the political decision-making processes. In terms of the second part of that, which is that flexible enough? What we've tried to do in each of those areas, and it's similar to the in a way to the innovation fund we were talking about earlier, is in most of these areas, Cabinet has approved a headline fund. We then go into the design of a funding mechanism, which then turns into an assurance process, which involves, in effect, testing the market. So actually, there are a few examples where we've made headline allocations, and that translates into expression of interest processes where we can look and say, how robust does this pipeline look like? Do we now have in front of us proposals that reflect what we thought that wider economic value might be, et cetera, et cetera. So there's flexibility inbuilt into the development process, and then in terms of the governance of these mechanisms, we, insofar as we possibly can, and I think you can see this in the gap between what's allocated and funding that's actually defrayed. There's often a bit of a gap between those two where we can be flexible and ask ourselves via the investment panel, are we putting money where it's now needed? And in some circumstances, we've seen, for example, in relation to some of our very early STEM investments, that the nature of how that work is done has had to change because of COVID, which is, I think, one example of how we've been able to be flexible. In terms of your question about where's the comparative advantage, that's a really good question that I think every region is scratching for. Personally, I think we have a number of comparative advantages that go across the sectors, which is partly about the place and about the type of place we are, the cost base, the life-work balance, the close-knitness, if that's even a word, that we have in terms of being able to support propositions as they come through. Great research base, good skills base, despite some of the gaps that Rob will have outlined in his piece. And then there are some really sector-specific ones which have definitely gone into the decision-making process. Now, there's some risk in this, obviously, because we just don't know what the future looks like. But in terms of digital, we think there's quite a bit in there, ranging from expertise around data analytics through to some of the, through to a big subsea cable landing in the northeast and extending out to Europe and North America, and an existing cluster of digital businesses that include big government presence, for example, DWP, HMRC, etc. So there's some good reasons to think that we, on digital, whilst we might not be the only place, that we don't need to try and pretend we can create a new Silicon Valley, but we do have some really strong assets to build on, and we should build on those because they're going to be foundational. And then on Green New Deal, I think there is, again, that there's a big national play in terms of every region needing a degree of investment to be able to make that transition. And here, the key component, as you've rightly said, I think, is the fact that we've got the ability to attempt to close this loop around clean energy and what it does, and its supply chain and its R&D base. And we have such fantastic assets here, along the Tyne and up to Blythe, but a need to really cement that by making sure that manufacturing is onshored to a greater extent over the coming years, which is about us making the policy case to government as much as it is putting money in the system. So I don't suppose that's an answer to your questions, but everything you've said is absolutely on the button in terms of the issues we are trying to work through. And the flexibility point is really important to Cabinet. And I think the next 6 months are going to be key, because that's when quite a lot of this work turns into delivery mechanisms and money hitting the ground and actual things happening in the world. So we will absolutely be trying to make sure that that's adding as most value as possible.
Right, thanks for that. That's reassuring, because nobody knows what's around the corner. I just want to make sure that you're adaptable and flexible and not putting all your eggs in one basket, same as everybody else is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any more questions or comments from committee members? No, I don't see anybody, but I've just got a few. Do you know, in terms of in the report, how we're talking about digital adoption, it's good to see that we're not being parochial in terms of just thinking, one small part of the Northeast, that there's a little bit of a combined approach and working with, as specifically says, the Valley there. Just with that relationship and positive work and partnership there, just looking to digital infrastructure and how we've, got the the fibre internet out into public buildings across the North of Tyne area. Is there a joint up approach working with what the digital programs are within the Borderlands growth deal? Because it would seem a bit pointless if there's any duplication of work and a waste of resources. So hopefully there's some communication and coordination there.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about joint up approaches, in terms of the green growth sector update and things as well, as partly we're looking at sort of becoming more of a green, the world becoming more green and energy efficient. But in terms of just like what's on our doorstep in other areas, that in the Borderlands growth deal area, they're wanting to create I wrote it down, energy investment company for providing, local energy to the Borderlands area. Is there any potential that we as a North of Tyne combined authority area, considering that the Borderlands covers pretty much the whole area across straddle the border in Cumbria, and it kind of just misses out, Newcastle and North Tyneside? Is there a way that the whole North of Tyne area can sort of be part of that, or look to seeing if there's any infrastructure there that helps support us? And in terms of decarbonising transport, a couple of weeks ago now, government announced that they want the Tees Valley Combined Authority to be the UK's central hub for hydrogen energy. Now, if we're looking to new technology and new futures of green energy, are we kind of missing the boat by, putting all this investment into electrical car charging points if the technology within the next couple of years is going to surpass that? Should we not, as a region, try to get ahead of the game and offer ourselves as a region that we've got the latest infrastructure and technology? That was just my comments.
Okay, thank you, Chair. There's a couple of really specific things that have got really specific responses that I can give, and then maybe the last question is slightly broader. In terms of the wider regional connectivity and working with the Catapult, which obviously covers the North East and Tees Valley more broadly, two things to say. One is, you'll recall from last time we walked through recovery plans, there is an LA7 level transport and digital connectivity plan which has been developed, which we played a really important role in helping to develop, which reflects quite an ambitious set of investments in digital connectivity across the whole region. And of course, we'd see that as being fundamentally interconnected. The investment specifically in the delivery of that on digital adoption through the Catapult is via an organisation that works more widely, but the resources and the activities are specifically are North of Tyne based. So there's no, we're not taking our we're not funding work for the whole North East. We're funding work for the North of Tyne specifically via that organisation. So I thought it was important to clarify that. And in terms of the strength of coordination across the teams, I would say that's very strong at an officer level. That we have a regular, grandly called digital executive board, but is essentially a group of the digital leads from each of our three local authorities. There's a collaboration between authorities on this stuff that predates the combined authority, obviously, and I wouldn't want to suggest that that's all about us. But on every issue, from thinking about delivery of the LFFN and the infrastructure work to bidding for new, we're inevitably going to be in bidding rounds for new government money, whether that's for fixed fibre or 5G. We know some of that is coming, but also thinking about how our local authorities collaborate on supporting public service improvement. Again, might not be about our investment, but that convening role of the combined authority and the fact that we've got close links is really positive. And then on Borderlands in particular, there's a really explicit commitment in our recovery and renewal deal that we put into government that we would, as a North of Tyne combined authority, look to maximise the impact of Borderlands as much as we possibly can, partly because there's a capital and revenue mix. We look at the makeup of our investment funds, but also because I know colleagues in Northumberland would see the same opportunities that you've just outlined around how you make the best of existing infrastructure investments in towns and places, and then, frankly, where we can pinch ideas and scale them, we're always up for doing that, partly because we can make best use of our resource. And that's true, I think, of what we hope will be an investment in the Northumberland line and the wider economic value of that. You know, they're initiatives that aren't necessarily bought and paid for and delivered by the combined authority, but where we can show the value of the collaboration, and I think that's just as valuable, really. And then on your final point, I might try and run away from that one. I do think there's a process at play which is, I don't know, in place of an industrial strategy. I might be saying too much here, but you know, we've had a kind of slightly AC/DC debate over the last 2 or 3 years about the need for a national industrial strategy, a tip into local industrial strategies, the development of some of those industrial strategies across places. We didn't publish ours as a wider Northeast region, but that process happened. Then a bit of silence, really. Then some really clear government policy goals that didn't necessarily align with that. So, you know, some of the commitments around that the new government has made around where it wants to put investment and how haven't necessarily come out of all of those industrial strategies. But there's no doubt that there is thinking going on in government now about how you support recovery and which region has a comparative advantage in which set of things. So I would see partly, as you described it, in the nod towards investment in Tees Valley for certain things is as much about how government perceives regions and the politics of regions as it is about the evidence base. I would say we, from our end, are being quite firm as a whole region and quite pushy around what we see as a really credible proposition to unlock big economic value from the clean energy plays that we have here, ranging from, you know, getting rid of cables on the Tyne to enable bigger wind turbines to come down the river, right the way through to how you make the big use of the best use of sites on the energy park in Blyth, for example. So there is there's lots and lots of ongoing work, and a big, you know, a 400 million size pitch into government that we put in very, very formally before the spending review, which we are expecting some activity to come off the back of. But this is a real mix of national politics and what we might be able to do locally. Rob, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I think that's great. I mean, I think in terms of hydrogen, it seems likely that hydrogen will be used for, you know, for trains and big industrial processes or machines in the first instance. I think we're probably still some way off commercially viable cars that are hydrogen. But, you know, as Henry said, it's very hard to predict really what the technology is going to be in this area.
Thanks for that. Is there any other members who've got any questions or comments? No, I don't see anybody. So I would just like to place on record my thanks to both Henry and Rob for covering this report. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of progress that's happened in this portfolio area since last time. And obviously this is one that we want to really keep the eye on in terms of how we as a region make ourselves as a better offer compared to other regions across the country, and how it helps grow the economy. And just to pick up on a point, I would like to echo what Councillor Stone said earlier on, that I think it would be good to get Councillor Forbes back to a future meeting, because there's probably questions that members might have that isn't appropriate to ask officers, because it needs a little bit of a political lead direction. So as a follow-up to that, I think it's fair that this committee write to Councillor Forbes and offer him any committee that he wish that fits around his calendar for the rest of our municipal year, and we'll see how that goes.
We'll take you anytime he wants to come, we'll see him.
Yeah, anytime, yeah. So with that, are members happy to note that that's a sufficient update on that report?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
So that takes us on to item 11, date and time of the next meeting. So the next formal committee meeting is 9th of February 2021 at 10 a.m. and that's a virtual basis. But I'd just like to remind members that in early January, we do have our budget workshop on the 12th of January at 10 a.m. So I hope to see you all there. And I would just like to thank everybody for attending the meeting this morning. There was some good contributions from members and officers, and it's very good to see that this committee's working well together. And to anyone who's watching this, thank you for being interested in the combined authority in our work. And just wish members and officers a good time over the festive period as much as possible, given the circumstances, and see you all in the new year. Thanks.
Thank you,
Chair.